about to start. We'll talk about code or whatever we'll talk about today. It's about to start, so please hang tight while I check that everything is okay. Sound check, camera check, lights check. How's my hair? Oh, wait, I don't have any hair. Maybe put some pants on and I am good to go. So get ready wherever you are, 'cause this stream is about to start. Get ready wherever you are, 'cause this stream is about to start.
All right. Hey, how's it going, everybody? Welcome to another stream where we geek out with some of the big Reaper legends. And today in the house, we got the wonderful Kenny Gioia right here. I think I got where he is. Yeah, there he is. And right below me, we got Leandro. So, hi, Kenny. How are you doing?
I'm great. How you guys doing?
Good.
It's so good to have you on the stream. The first time I asked you to be on the stream, or I asked you to be on my channel, and you were like, "How about you be on my channel?" And that was a great idea, because that I feel like was my biggest YouTube day. So thank you so much for having me on your channel.
Anytime. If you think I can help you at any point, I'd love to do it. I don't always know how to.
That's awesome. You know, just both you and John have been so helpful to me, and all the kind of new wave of Reaper content creators. It's just so awesome. You've been very welcoming and very helpful. Yeah.
I don't view. I never view it. I've told John Tidy this before as well. I don't view anything as a competition. I look at the more people make content, the better. You know, I was just looking at everyone's subscribers the other day, and I was like, I have 113,000, which is bad luck, but I have 113,000 subscribers. And my goal, my wish is for every one of us to be having 120,000 subscribers, not for me to be, you know, everyone else.
And do you watch all these people? Are you like on YouTube finding channels of smaller creators?
I do a little bit. The only reason I don't watch too much of it is I tend to copy people, and that's a bad quality, but I tend to see someone else's idea and I'm like, I don't mind copying other creators like who don't make videos for Reaper, but I don't want to be like, I really want that to be different lanes for everyone. Like John tends to make videos where he shows like any new features that come out on a new update, and you notice I never make those kind of videos because, like, to me, I look at it, that's his thing. You know what I mean? I tend to be more documenting Reaper stuff and more long-lasting things. You know, things that you can go back 8 years and still get some use out of them. Where he's making a lot of videos that are like, what's new in Reaper 6.51 or whatever, things like that. So I really try to stay out of that lane for that kind of stuff.
He does them so well too.
Totally.
It's hard to like look at that changelog and actually sometimes it's hard for me to figure out what this changelog actually refers to. But John goes and figures it out, which is awesome.
I hope he likes it because I hate it. I hate having to look at those. I look at the changelog and I wish I could just see like all the big important things would like be in bold. So it would say like, here's things that are video worthy, and here are things that are, because a lot of things are like make things work faster. I can't make a video showing that, you know. It's like that doesn't.
We should make a changelog for dummies. Like it just says, this is what we have. Like new feature, Delta Solo, go nuts.
So I'm constantly wading through all that stuff, and when I was younger, I was a little better at skimming unimportant things for important things, but lately I've become worse and worse at that, where I just like skim through everything, and then I find out a few months later, when did this come out? And then Justin Schwab will be like, that came out like 4 months ago. I'm like, oh yeah, I knew that.
That's actually a question I was about to ask you. There's another live stream you've done. I think it's a few years old with, I'm blanking on the name of this person, but it's you and a few other producers talking about mostly production, some Reaper. And you were saying like, Justin and Shua don't really like tell you what to cover. You just you cover what you feel like doing. But do they ever go like, oh, we're pushing this new feature, like?
Not usually, because on the Slack I'm seeing basically all the conversations that are taking place. So usually if it's a big enough feature, they're talking about it a lot. So it's hard to miss. But there are certain times like Chihuahua or Justin are working on something really hard just by themselves. And then if they're not talking back and forth, there's no reason to have a conversation because I'm not really involved in the making of that thing. So I could miss things here and there. But most times if it's something big enough, it's going on, it's in the discussion for long enough that I usually won't miss it. Like the media lanes that we're talking about now. It may be impossible for me not to hear what's going on with that because, it's being talked about constantly. But there are things that still sneak through. But they don't – there was a time early on where we were going back and forth on what to copy in videos, and I have a feeling Justin didn't enjoy that. So, the minutia of like, what if you did this? What if you did that? Because one of the things that's really hard with videos, it's like I always say with Jeff, who makes the manual, is that it's very easy for him to just go in and just cut a paragraph out, put a new paragraph with new information. Not saying it's easy, but it's a little easier than it is to take a video where I mapped it out, like here's how this feature works, and now something just changed dramatically, and now I have to reevaluate the whole thing. It's just easier to make it all again, which is hard in itself. So it's harder to do adjustments to things than it is to just cover something completely new.
And when you're having this when you are having these conversations, does it ever happen that the way you could explain something informs the feature that they are developing? Because I find that sometimes trying to explain something changes the thing that you are explaining.
So, rephrase that again. I kind of got it, but I didn't fully grasp what you meant.
Yeah, so one thing that happens to me often is I am developing some piece of software and then I am starting to write the manual or doing the video to explain how it works. And then I see, that's kind of hard to explain. And if it's hard to explain, it's hard to understand. So I better change the way that it works. So do you ever chime into these conversations and help shape the features so that they make more sense?
Yeah, but unfortunately that tends to happen late, which messes me up on the video side. What tends to happen is if I'm involved too much early in the process, there's going to be a couple of months before it ever comes out. So what happens, I have a very short-term memory. I'm very much like if I think of an idea for a video, I want to make that video today or tomorrow. So if I get too involved in the pre-release stuff, it might be a couple of months before it's in a final version. And even if it is in a final version, it still could change a week or two later after that, as you guys know. So I try to, I say it all the time, like, is it like you feel like it's done? Because I don't want to cover anything and then have things change. And what happens way too often, and it's nobody's fault but mine, they'll release something, it's final, and I haven't played with it enough. And then I'll make a video on it, and then I'll come to them and go, I think it would make more sense is if you change, and it's usually minor things. It's not like completely changing it, but it'll be like a minor tweak. And they'll go, yeah, you're right, I should do that. And then they do it. Now my video I just shot has become useless because I've improved it, but I've also just wrecked my video. But I always say, like, improving is more important than wrecking my video. But that happens a lot. Maybe 4 to 5 times a year, I'll like say, change this. And then I'm like, I just screwed up my video because I showed the other. Like I showed the hard way how to fix it. And then they'll watch my video and they go, we could just do this. And I'm like, because now I've just shown it. I've shown the workaround of how to fix it. And they're like, it'd be so much easier if we just do this. But again, that's my fault for not getting involved early enough in the process. But it's worth the extra work. Because if I get involved early in the process, I can't make a video about it. So that throws me off as well. So I can't complain. I got the best job in the world.
It's a great job you got there. So I always wondered if do you write a script or do you write bullet points? And I'm also assuming you're not doing the voiceover and the actions at the same time. Do you make the video, then do voiceover?
That's actually a great question. No, 90% of the time, or I'd say not even like as a plan, just 90% of the videos I've ever made, or 95, I've always shot at the same time. Because what happens is if I don't do it at the same time, I lose a little bit, not that I have a great amount of energy, but I lose some of the energy in it. And then I go back, like I've tried what you're saying, where I'll actually just shoot the entire video without saying a word. And that helps with my overthinking about my voice. Sometimes my voice isn't feeling good or I'm tripping over words, as you can see right there. And that throws my confidence off. So sometimes the easiest thing, I should say, always the easiest thing for me to do is just to shoot the video without speaking. And then go back and do the audio, the talk over later. The problem with doing the talk over later is I tend to spend 4 to 6 hours editing my video. And if I'm doing it then, now I'm speaking for 6 hours a day. So, if you speak for 6 hours a day, by the end of the day, your voice is shot. Whereas if I just shoot it at the top, like almost every video I shoot is one take. Like, not because I'm great, but just because I know if I keep redoing it, I'm going to get worse and worse at it because I'm, just like flustered by it. So what I usually do is just shoot it once. And if I make a mistake, I'll fix it later in editing, which takes longer, but it works out better that way. But I almost always do it all live because, like I said, if I do it the other way, I'm talking too much in the editing process.
Okay, it's
Even
one
though I
take,
love-
but it's not like you don't splice parts of it together, right?
Oh my God. You want to see what my screen fully looks like? Let me see if I can open that
Yeah,
up.
true. We talked about this a little bit while setting up the stream. But yeah, lots of people asked what Kenny uses, and he uses ScreenFlow. Can
you see that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
we
See
can
how
see
many
it.
edits are
Wow,
there?
Splice City.
There's probably 500 edits in there in a 7-minute video.
Yeah.
I edit like
Okay.
crazy. One person actually threw me off once, and they said, "Do you quantize your voice to the video?" I was like, funny way of looking at it, but I tend to like that when I click on something, that's what I'm saying. It drives me crazy when people are clicking on one thing and they're saying something else. So if you notice, every time I start speaking, it's when my cursor moves with it. So I do a lot of that, try to get that perfect. But what could take 2 hours to edit takes 4 to 5 hours to edit because I really get caught up in the minutia of it. I'll spend 20 minutes on a minute of video, which I shouldn't, which is why I'm more excited about doing these kind of streaming things because you can't edit it.
Bish bash bosh, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
We
that's
can't
the
fix the-
secret.
You also have like your rhythm of speaking that I feel like you really stuck to. So it has its own kind of like scale and rhythm, which is really helpful. When I did that one video for your channel,
Oh my
I
God, it's
found
so
how
funny.
much easier it is than what I do, which is I just talk like myself. But as I'm kind of clicking through the screen, I tend to misspeak because if I'm talking about an item but looking at an envelope, I'll just say the wrong word all the time. And then I don't even realize it, go past it. And then in post, I realize, oh, I called this item a track and I called
Right.
this track a plugin and I called the plugin another thing. And then I'm like, I got to do it again.
But you don't have to do it again. That's the good thing about your videos is that you have such excitement in your delivery that I think that's a plus, and people wouldn't mind. What I've realized, and I don't do it with my videos, but people won't mind a mistake here and there as long as the content is still good. You know what I mean? If you make one mistake, I try to make my videos a little more perfect because I look at them as documenting features. I work for Reaper. So I try not to be character driven. I try not to be the face of Reaper, even though some people think that, but I really hate that. That's why I love when Justin does these kind of things, because to me, he's the face of Reaper. I'm someone showing the features in Reaper. That's why I'm not even on camera very often, just for the intros, because I don't want to be the face of Reaper. I don't want my character to be that, because I didn't invent Reaper. I'm just someone who's documenting it. So I really try to be like, this is how the feature works. No charisma, not that I have much, but you know what I mean? But you have tons of that charisma, so you should go with that. Even if you make a mistake and you have to fix it afterwards or fix it in the way or just cross out your face and write it over it, that's all charming stuff. That's great. So and why waste the time on redoing stuff? Because one of the reasons I don't do multiple takes of my videos is what I found I do is, and I guess it's my own problem, but I feel like I've already taught it, even though I'm doing like a third take of something. So in my brain, I start skimming over things that I think, well, you already heard that on the first pass. It's like, no, they didn't hear it on the first pass. Oh, I heard it on the first pass. So like, I go back and watch my third take, and I'm like, wow, I really skimmed through all the stuff that I did in the first 2 passes, and I moved on to the last one. It's like, that's not good. My first take was better because I'm thinking of the audience hasn't heard it yet. If I do 3 passes of it, my brain thinks, oh, no, you heard me do it on the first take. I'm not going to explore that any further. And it's like, no, you have to think it like this is the first time. So that's why I spend the extra time editing it, my first take, instead of doing take after take after take and getting frustrated with it. But
that's
like
so
I said,
true.
You have such charisma and excitement in what you do. You shouldn't lose that at all. That's your lane. And I think that's great that everyone has their own lane for the things.
Yeah, and I think more than any other community, Reaper should have a lot of content creators, because when you work at different people's workflow, it's so massively different as well. Like seeing, I don't know, somebody like, I'm trying to think who's like Nick Von K. Like his workflow is just so vastly different from anything I've ever seen, and it's the same program. It's just like The more the merrier.
That's how this whole thing started. I had no idea that I was ever going to make tutorials as part of my job. The whole thing started, I have no idea how many years ago, let's say 12 years ago. I was working with Pro Tools. I was in the DUC, which is the Digital Design User Conference, which now has a different name, who cares? But back at that time, it was me and like 3 or 4 other people. And this is back in a time when 90% of the people on the forums were people who were working in the industry. It wasn't the way it is now, where it's 90% people who are prosumer and 10% or 5% professionals. This was pretty much all professionals. We were all doing this for a living, working on Pro Tools or whatever all day long. And my idea was, let's all film ourselves and watch each other, because then we could learn how we work. Because I would learn something from anybody using Pro Tools. Like I had a kid I was producing, he was a 17-year-old kid, came up to my keyboard and started touching some keys. He knew Pro Tools a little bit, and he hit some keys. I was like, what the hell did you just do? He's like, oh, I just did this. Like, he didn't know half of what I knew, but he just knew, he knew a little bit, and it was different than the way I was doing it. I was like, that's pretty cool. So you're right. Watching somebody else do something, everybody figures out their own way, because most of us are learning this by ourselves. We get a few things from tutorials, but most of us are just figuring things out. So I guarantee if I watched you work, I would pick up so many things and change my workflow, and vice versa. So that's how it all started. And what happened was I filmed myself, hoping they would film themselves, and nobody else did it but me.
It usually goes like that. So speaking of workflow, there are many questions we got when we started asking people what they wanted to know about Kenny. So we got many questions about workflow. So can you like briefly go over, like, do you write a script or not? And you don't.
Never write a script.
You just have an idea for something that maybe you knew was coming out or something else, and then you come up with like what you want to show, and then record for.
Basically, like I said, I have a very short-term memory. So what I can do is it doesn't stay in my brain very long, but my brain is wide enough to hold a video's idea in it at one point. So it's figure a 12 to 15 minute video. I can hold that much in my brain at one point, which is why when I have the idea, I got to shoot it and do it there, because I can picture the whole thing. I can picture the length. I can picture the 3 different things I'm going to show it, how I'm going to start, how I'm going to end, all that stuff. I get that in my head. And then the most I'll ever write down is bullet points. And bullet points would only be like, let's say I'm showing off an EQ, and I really hate the idea of like fumbling around with an EQ that I don't know what I'm going to do with it. So like, let's say I'm showing EQ on a snare. I'll spend a few minutes EQing the snare before I start recording. I'll go, okay, I'm going to boost it 3 dB at 3K. I'm going to cut it here. And then I'll just write those settings down in bullet points so that when I do redo it, I'll grab my mouse, start doing it, and I'll look back at the bullet points to make sure I'm at the same thing. Because at that moment, I'm not listening to the snare. I'm thinking about what I'm doing and teaching. So I'll write things down like amounts of things. You know what I mean? Like what LUFS level I'm going for this point, or those kind of things. And a lot of times I'll write the script, I'll write the bullet points and then never look at them. And then I'll look at them after I shot the video and notice all the ones I missed. Because in my brain, I'm just like free flowing as I'm going. But if it's really something big, I'll just pop it in the middle. But most times I usually catch all the points anyway. There was something I did very recently where I really missed a few. I completely skipped a step, and I had to fix it in video editing. It was when I was doing, what video was it? Only trying to think of it because I thought it was pretty interesting, where I was doing something where I was showing multiple uses of Resample-Matic 8000, 5000, whatever it's called. And I was showing how to use different keys for playing a melody on it. And I completely skipped the step where I showed how to assign a different key for each one, like hit C, then D, then I somehow made the video and skipped that whole step. So I had to go back with video editing and literally in ScreenFlow cutting up truncated pieces, cropped pieces of different video on top of each other to show that I actually did show things that I didn't show. So I get pretty nuts with that stuff just because I had no other way of fixing it other than doing the whole video again. And that particular video was a long one. It was like a 26-minute shot that I edited down to like 12 to 14 minutes. So in my head, I was like, I'm not shooting that whole video again. I'm just going to somehow fix that piece in there. And I do get a little too obsessed with putting pieces in the middle and having it feel like it's still the same thing. Even though, like I was saying to you before, no one would really care if you just said, hey, I'm just popping this in there. But in my head, I hate that. So I always try to like make it look like what was there before. I've gotten
some hate mail on that. They go like, oh, why did your screen suddenly jump somewhere else? And I'm like, I don't know, because I splice all this stuff together from like...
But in the end, they're just getting the content, so it doesn't really matter. You don't need to obsess about it. But I do. I'll find this thing where one of the dialogues had a setting set incorrectly, and I'll just truncate a screenshot of just that one little piece of the screen, and I'll superimpose it over 3 minutes of the shot. We'll have it on top of it so people don't see that. just so that it looked like that mistake that I made.
So a 10-minute video for you is like a half-hour shoot, something like that.
It's usually it's usually 20 minutes of me procrastinating to shoot it, walking around my house going, okay. And then usually it's just one shot. But a typical 12-minute video would probably be 20, 22 minutes, of straight ahead. Like, cause I do tons of pausing. Like if you don't, cause one of the things I know is I'm going to edit it anyway. So there's no reason for me to talk really fast over a spot. So if I'm not saying something the way I want to say it, I'll just pause while I'm shooting it and just go, all right. And then I'll clearly say it, and then I'll stop. No, that's not the best way to say it. And then I'll say it. So once I'm done with the paragraph the way I wanted to say it, then I know I'm good because I'm just going to edit it out later anyway. But like you couldn't watch that 22-minute video I shoot and get much out of it because there's so many pauses, so many times I'm re-saying the same line twice, which I started doing that because I realized I had such a habit of doing that where if I said something wrong, I would go, where I've said something wrong, I would go, where I've said something wrong, I would go because I'm like, I can't do because people are going to think I'm weird.
If only we could edit real life. So then you have this piece of recording, and then you have kind of an interesting workflow with ScreenFlow and Reaper for the audio. Can you walk us through that?
Explain that question a little better.
Yeah, okay, so you have this recording, and then you use ScreenFlow for editing, but you also use Reaper for some audio processing.
Oh, gotcha. Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, so I'll capture everything in ScreenFlow on different tracks. I have my vocal mic, which is not this one, it's actually this one, because I had to put my camera on this side today. But again, this changes every few weeks. I had a shotgun mic a week ago. So if you go back through all my videos, you'll notice you might not notice it, but I'm using a different mic. Every 3 to 4 weeks, I'm using a different mic because I'm constantly trying different things. This is my Pod Mic Pro, which I stopped using about 5 weeks ago. And this one I started using about 2 weeks ago because it's a condenser, but I'm not going to get into those details. But back to the original question. So I'll shoot everything in Reaper on different tracks. So I have my voice in one, and then the music will be another. And then obviously video will be a separate track. Then I take my voice and bring that back into Reaper and then do like crazy editing in there. I have probably 12 plugins in there, which will be starting with reverb just to get rid of any noise. I don't use a noise gate because that's going to just trigger accidentally different times. So I don't see any point of using a noise gate. The reverb takes care of all that. I'll take a section that's like 5 seconds long of me not speaking and just put that into reverb. I've made videos on it, and then just eliminate all that noise. Then I'll go back and usually I use a dynamic split and just cut everything up so there's no spaces in between, which will get rid of any breathing or anything like that, or tick sounds or any of that kind of stuff. So now I have to cut up into little pieces, and then I'll just listen to it straight through. And if there's any kind of noises I'm hear, like a lip smack or if I say EQ, I always hit the Q too hard. So I go in there and I put a crossfade that fades out and fades in before each time. And when I say words like split, there's always like this little plosive sound that drives me crazy, which is why I hate dynamic mics. So I go and I fix those things. So I basically spend, if it's a 15-minute shot, I'll spend 25 minutes listening to it through, just make sure there's no kind of weirdness, and also removing obviously the bad pieces that I'm not going to use, because that makes the video editing go quicker. And then I just export that back out as the exact same length. I didn't edit the time at all. I just cleaned up the audio, send that back to ScreenFlow, import it back in, and then just start the video editing. And as I showed you here, it's just constant cutting up video editing, moving my audio, the voice to be more matching of what I'm doing with my fingers at the time. I used to actually fix my cursor, but I've been doing that a little bit better lately. I do that maybe 2 or 3 times in the whole video, where I'll have a picture of a cursor that I'll put it into ScreenFlow, and I'll have it move where I want it to move, because it moved better than my hand did at the time. This way the cursor, it drives me crazy when my cursor like goes over here. I do an edit, now the cursor's over here. So someone's trying to follow their eyes. So what I'll do in that moment is I'll grab a screen cap of something that looks just like the screen without the arrow there. I'll superimpose it over the arrow, so now there's no arrow. And then I'll make that a regular file. I know it's insane. I make that a regular file, and then I'll take my purposely pictured cursor and have that go from one point to the other. This way, if you're looking at my cursor, it's always smoothly moving. It's never jumping from here to here to here.
I'm pretty sure that in ScreenFlow you can turn on and off the cursor.
You can do that, but there's one problem with it, and it's in Reaper. There's something that changed with the Silicon Max, where for some reason in Reaper, I don't know if you've tried this in ScreenFlow, when you move the cursor, it stays a big size, and then when you stop, the cursor gets small. So it gets big and small depending on when you move it. I couldn't figure out a way of fixing it. The only way I fixed it was I turn on OBS in the background, and then it ignores the cursor completely. But the good side of that is when you make a cursor look bigger, the cursor looks clearer. Whereas if you try to use ScreenFlow to make the cursor look bigger, it looks very pixelated. Again, these things just drive me crazy.
That's cursor getting big is like an accessibility feature on Mac. I can show you afterwards how to turn that off if you want.
Okay.
Lots of people are asking a question which I'll rephrase into one question. So when you hit 100,000 subscribers, you revealed your face. Then you started showing like a little intro with your face and putting your face on thumbnails. And now there's an animated version. So kind of talk to us about that. Like what made you decide to do it? Did you make the animation? What are the new thumbnails doing for the channel? Stuff like this.
Okay, I didn't make the animation. I hired 3 different people on, what is it called, Fiverr?
Fiverr, cool.
Yeah, to make ones for me, and I'm really happy with what they did. But it took a lot of direction because they were. I don't think they spoke English. They would just get any direction I gave them. They would kind of follow exactly what I said, and I was trying to get them to be a little more creative with it. But every time I would say what I want, they would do exactly what I said, and I was like, yeah, I wanted it to be a little more creative because I can't draw. So, but I wound up getting that guy, and the guy's head moves to the music, and that's really not. His head wasn't supposed to move to the music. What happened was they made it too short. So he moved his head once, and I needed to extend it, so I just basically doubled it, and it wound up his head going like this. I was like, that goes to the music, so that works. So I used that. But the whole purpose of all of it was that by showing my face and all this is I'm hoping to start making videos like this, not necessarily Reaper ones, because I don't really want to put myself in the corner while making Reaper videos, because then it becomes harder for editing. Because like I said, I don't like my cursor jumping. I don't want my face jumping either. So I probably, and I obviously can't do it in one take. So I don't think I'm ever going to do those corner videos, but I want to start making videos like this where I just like talk about production, or, you know, they could be Reaper based, but they wouldn't be Reaper videos. You know, they'd be like more broad based mixing things or things like that. So I wanted to get into that a little bit more. So that's why I'm using my camera instead of using a, what do you call them? The little streaming thing on your thing up there.
Webcam.
Webcam, because I want to start, you know, upping that game and stuff. Like I have decent lights. I bought a shotgun mic, which I'm not using because I didn't have the right clip for it. Otherwise, it would have been right in the shot right here. But I wound up using this instead. But I'm trying to up my game in terms of the video side of it, and eventually start making videos that look more like this, where I'm just talking to the camera, hoping those will go quicker too.
I think lots of people will like that. Lots of people asked if you are planning to bring back your podcast, which, in case you don't know, it's called Mix Sessions from Hell. Yes. If you don't know, go listen to it. I find it like a really fun podcast. It's not even like, it's not necessarily like, don't go watching it, no go listening to it thinking you're going to get like EQ tips, but it's just like a lot of really good professional advice that like you can mix forever and not get those kind of client relations bits of wisdom. So I really like that. So yeah, is the podcast coming back now that you're doing this video thing?
The reason we stopped doing the podcast, I mean, first of all, to me, it's outdated because it's just audio. I think it should be video. So I think if we could all get our camera games up, if you notice by listening to it, some of our microphones weren't very good back then either. But if we can get our video thing, like the way you guys do this live, where it's like this, once you're done with this, you hit upload and you're done. Like if we could do that, great, we should do it. You know, we can get the video going, we can figure out the technology. What I was doing back then was we were recording all the audio, we were sending me the final files, I was uploading them, and then I was editing like crazy. So I would spend 5-6 hours editing one episode. And I think we did like 20 episodes, and I was like, and I'm not expecting them to pay me. This is my idea, but I'm like, it's just not a good source of my time. You know, there's things I could do better, but I love doing it. If we could do it like this, I would do it tomorrow. You know,
nice.
I love doing these kind of, because it's effortless. You know what I mean? These moments just come and they go. You know, there's I forgot the author I was watching the other day, where she was talking about, like, she's a writer, and she's like, writing books is hard, but she's also not very famous for doing these kind of things, where she just talks, and she's like, this is easy. Turn on the mic and just start talking. You know, I could do this all day.
Yeah, well, exactly. Arya should tell you about how his OBS is treating him for streaming.
It's not been fun. Yeah, it's not been fun to stream for me, but I think I always knew this day would come, and it's finally come. I need to just wipe my hard drive, start over again, no looking back, just looking forward. Yeah, I just gotta do that because OBS has been like kind of useless. I use ScreenFlow, but I like editing in Reaper. It's a whole thing. It used to be that I wouldn't touch anything other than Reaper and OBS and GIMP, and now I gotta like do all this extra stuff, and it takes me out of my. I would say takes me out of my comfort zone, but that's actually a good thing. It just takes me out of like where I'm comfortable, and I'm focusing on all these other things that aren't. About like showing the weird stuff I do in Reaper. Let's talk about Reaper. Mike asks if you like coffee.
I have some questions for you before you move on.
Oh, absolutely.
Are you talking about just for your regular videos, just having yourself in the corner? You going through this, or are you just talking about for streaming?
Both. So yeah, like it started from me not being able to record, and now I also can't stream. It used to be I could stream, and I was actually mixing my whole album like on live streams, and it was really fun. People were coming and like giving me suggestions, or just if it was really good to kind of have people, somebody would join the stream and be like, whoa, so much high end, and they'd be right usually. But by that time in the stream, like my kind of high end perception has been kind of tampered with, and then I would constantly get like an inflow of new ears. It was really good. It was really useful for me, and I think it was useful for people. But now my computer just can't handle it, especially now, like once you get kind of ahead in the mix and there's like plugins in, it just can't do OBS at the same time.
I gotcha.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just to step back a little bit, the thing that works for me with my working so hard on my editing is I actually do enjoy that part of it, which is what the bad, like as much as it drives me crazy, I kind of wish I was finished with that video at that moment. I'm very detail oriented. So I would love to those guys who spend 3 weeks working on like animation where they just take a stop motion animation and just move it this far and then take another picture, takes a picture. It sounds like crazy, but I kind of like the technical side of it. So as much as it's crazy to look at my ScreenFlow thing and see like, wow, he really edits a lot, I kind of enjoy the getting perfection out of that. So as long as you're enjoying, if you're feeling like I have so many ideas to come out and the editing is getting in the way, then obviously you have to fix that. You know what I mean? Because people have told me I can afford to hire an editor, but I can make more content. But honestly, I don't have 36 videos a month in me content-wise, so I'd be scared if I probably put out 30 videos a month if someone else was editing them, but I don't have 30 ideas a month, so I'd be scared to do that. But, at some point it does make sense to hire technical people to help you with that stuff if you don't enjoy it. I
love editing. I just like recording, I guess, has been a hassle because I do like a whole recording and then I realize for like the most important part, OBS has recorded like 2 frames per second and it's all jumpy and my voice jumps around. So it used to be kind of just all happening in the background and then I would edit it and I really enjoyed that, and I would do ADR, I would do all sorts of things. But yeah, like I hate when technical issues kind of get in the way of like, whatever content it is you're doing. So that's why I really want to kind of, I want to just completely start over computer wise. Somebody asked if you like coffee, and if so, what's your favorite?
I am a coffee crazy person. I finished my coffee. I was going to show you my coffee because I could do a whole podcast on making coffee. During COVID, I bought one of those Barista Express things, those machines, for the home with all the things in it. And I've perfected my cappuccinos every day. So I have a iced coffee in the afternoon. I have a hot coffee in the morning. And I've gotten to the point where it started off with just coffee and milk and sugar. And now it's coffee, milk, sugar, cinnamon, honey glazed almonds that I grind each time. I use cardamom. The ingredients never stop because I use the froth milk on top. At the end, it looks like an ice cream sundae. It blows away anything Starbucks can make. And I buy all my coffee from the local grower around here. I've gotten so tuned into that kind of stuff. I get lost in those kind of things, which is what I love about this whole world of recording is you can get lost in the technical side of anything. Like I've made if you ever read my blog, I talk about the process where people talk about like analog versus digital, which came up in the conversation you had with Justin. And I wanted to chime in during because I felt like the thing that's so great about analog, it's not necessarily better sounding or more creative. there's a process to it. It's like, and I hate to start bringing up drugs, but I always talk about like rolling a joint. Like I don't want someone else, and I'm just so you know, I don't actually smoke, but if I do smoke, I don't need someone else to roll all my joints for me and roll them out for me so I can have them. Or another example would be like shrimp, where I'd have a friend who's like, I'm going to cut all the shrimp open for you. It's like, no. I enjoy the process of opening up the shrimp. You know what I mean? Like doing it's the process of getting or rolling the joint or any of that stuff, or cigars. Like there's a process to making it all and then enjoying it at the end. Like when I make my coffee, it takes me 15 minutes to make my coffee. I don't want someone else just to hand me coffee. You know, I do that sometimes, but there's a process to it. And if you love the process, you love all this. So when it comes to the analog synths or anything, it's not just about that stuff. It's about being around these machines and like doing the hard work. You know, there's a process. Like back in the day, when I was doing my record, which was like a Def Leppard sounding like a glam band. We didn't have any way of flying vocals in, and we only had 24 tracks of tape. So what we do is we'd have 2 tracks of our audio that we'd bounce down our instrumental of the song to 2 tracks, then take another piece of 24-track tape, fly those instrumental tracks into track 1 and 2, and now we had 22 tracks of vocals we could do. So we would do like 4-part harmonies in dividing tracks. And then when we were done with that, we'd fly each section of those. Actually, we did it another way. We would do 22 of one part, fly that into a 1/2-inch piece of tape, 22 of another part, fly that into a 1/2-inch of tape, and do that like 4 times. Then we have this 1/2-inch of tape, put the original tape back on the reel and fly it in manually. Literally, I would have a play button like this, and I would count. I would put a stripe on the tape and go 1, 2, 3, and hit play and get it in time with it. And you know, you have to do it like a few times until you got it right, and then you'd fly that into every single chorus. So we devote like 6 to 8 tracks of vocals, but there were really 22 of each. Like there's a process to that. Like nowadays, it's easier, and I'm not saying anyone should go back and do that, but there's something great about the process of thinking those things out. You know, it's the same way with writing scripts or any of those things. There's a fun in the process of it. It's not just simply like, what's the best way to do this and get it over with? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I want to do this. I don't want to just have it done.
It's funny, like people, I always feel like when people complain about like the minutia of Reaper, like, oh, I want a split under mouse cursor and grouped items or something. I'm like, if an old engineer heard you where they had to grab a razor and if they messed up, like that's it. Oh my God.
I used to have to kick everyone out of the room when I did it because you only had one chance. You'd have a 24-track tape and they wanted to cut a chorus from the other. I would have to kick everybody out of the room because I needed my head completely clear where I'm doing it. And I have all the tape sitting up on the wall labeled because, like you said, if you mess up that edit, you have to put it all back. It's never going to – it's a mess. Or punching in and out. Like I have a studio producer on me and I'm doing punches in and out and you can't mess those up. You punch in early and you ruin a take. I've once had a thing where I came this close. The whole band recorded. It was a major label production, and I was just the engineer on it. I almost punched into every single track when I was supposed to punch in the bass. The bass player came into this control room to fix a part, and I had all the tracks in record. Ooh. And you know, like those machines, you chose it that when I was like this close, and I was like, oh, almost punched into the entire take, and then it's gone. You know, it's like, and of course the producer will kill you because like he'll say that's the best take ever, and you completely ruined this record. So those things mattered. Those things don't matter anymore. It's very hard to ruin anything. I
never like, I wasn't around in the tape days, but like because I grew up in Iran, my early studio days, like software was hard to get in Iran, but a lot of people had like old kind of analog hardware. So one thing that very rarely kind of enters the analog versus digital conversation, they always compare the sound, and I personally rarely hear much difference, at least nowadays. But like what I miss about analog is like the tactile action of it, right? Exactly. Like I just like touching a thing, and it was nice. Like some knobs were bigger and it was like more serious. You know what I mean? Like, it felt like you're actually doing something, and it felt like you would even know. Like with mice, it's going from like 9 o'clock to 12 o'clock is the same as going from 12 o'clock to 3 o'clock. Oh, yeah. But in analog, it's different. So you know, like, hey, if my wrist is starting to hurt, maybe I'm going too far. And then you would like dial it back a little bit. I miss that stuff.
But one thing you never experienced was turning a knob, going, oh, that's so much better. And then going back to your board and looking, going, oh, wait, that was the wrong track. And that would happen just as often as anything. So that would fool your mind into realizing you think you hear things you don't hear. Like you just bring up the EQ on the bass and you're like, oh, that sounds so much better. And it's like, oh no, that was the snare.
Well, this plugin I've been using for the past 10 minutes is bypassed.
Oh yeah, you can totally trick your mind into all that kind of stuff. It's such a game.
It's crazy. Somebody's asking about the record behind you.
Notice those people will try to test me on an A/B test like that, and I always say to them, I can't do it with your content because I'm not intimately involved with that content. So like I always feel like it's like being, you're hyper focused on one thing. You could hear it a lot better. So someone would send me like an acoustic guitar they recorded with one AD converter, another acoustic guitar they sent with another AD converter, and say, well, tell me which one's an expensive one. I'm like, I don't care about either one of these acoustic recordings, so I can't dig into my brain to like really care about what you have to get that focused when you're mixing or recording something to really judge things that way. Try out a different preamp on a vocal while you're in the moment of going, what do I want this vocal to be? You can't just give me a vocal track or an acoustic guitar track and pick it out because my brain is not in that headspace at that moment. So that's what makes those A/B tests a little difficult. And people used to get so mad at me when I'd say that because like you're just trying to write it off and saying this gear is better than the other. I'm like, I'm not. I'm not in that headspace with your recording to make that same judgment. But like I said, I look at it more as the process. Well, one of my favorite producers, a guy named Matt Wallace, who showed up on our the Mix Notes from Hell podcast, and one of my favorite. It's more important what you record than how you record it. It's fun to play around with all these different things and change things, but what you record matters so much more because that's what people really listen to. I've never played a mix for somebody that wasn't in the music business and they came back to me and said a kind of comment about how bright the snare was. That's not the comment. They make a comment about, I love what she's saying or what he's saying, or, it's things that when you're doing a mix, you're not even paying attention to those things. That's why it's so important to pay attention to those things because that's what a listener is going to listen for. If the song, it doesn't move them, then no mixing is going to fix it. And what's also interesting, and I just noticed this the other day too, there's this recording, it was the Silk Sonic. I don't know if you guys are fans of Silk Sonic. I think they're
good stuff.
The bar is can't get better than those guys. And it was the guys from Pamplemousse, all those musicians were talking about the different chord structures they were using in the Silk Sonic song. I forget which song it was. I think it was Smoking Out Your Window or one of those top singles they had recently. And one thing I wanted to scream at the camera to them is like, it doesn't make a difference what they play because any of us in this room could walk onto those recordings and add something great onto it because it's an amazing song sung by amazing singers. So you're already moved by it. You can't mess it up. There's no EQ you can do to the snare drum on those recordings that's not still going to sound amazing. Because you can't do anything wrong to amazing songs and amazing performances, and you can't do anything right to the opposite. You know what I mean? You could spend hours and hours. Unless the content is good, it's not going to matter. And if the content's great, everything else gets real easy. You hire the best studio musicians with the best songs, the best singers. You could just sit back. It gets so, the job becomes easy. And if you're working hard, probably not going to matter because you're working too hard on something that's not very good.
I guess so. The challenge then is how do you find these jobs then, especially when you're starting out?
The one thing I learned early was just to hire. I was working in New York City. So one thing I learned early is spend the money and hire the studio musicians. If you're working on a soul pop, whether it's a female or pop male vocal type of production, hire the best people because they make your job so much easier. I used to use Steve Wolf as a drummer and Jack Daly as bass players. Jack Daly, Steve Wolf, you can just check out his discography, and Jack Daly the same. And then Sean, I'm forgetting his name right now. He played on Sean Collins' record. Sean, he's a drummer from Saturday Night Live Band. The guy always wears the pork pie hat. He's an amazing. Cool. He is the most amazing. Those guys, when you put them in the studio, they make you want to quit your instrument because they are so good at it. It's like, well, I can't play the drums anymore. I would just watch him play drums. But the thing that made it so easy for him is normally if I play the drums on those pop records, I would spend another few weeks doing percussion, adding loops to it, all these different other things to make it feel better. Those guys feel so good that you literally sit back and go, I don't need to do any of those things. Just put a bass, an acoustic guitar on top of it. This record's done. They fill in all those gaps. So it's so important to work with people that are, the quintessential of their instrument, and then you get so many ideas. Like I forgot the guitar player's name right now, but the same thing. We'd hire these guitar players and show a paying $600-700 a day, but they would come up with these cool guitar parts because they knew all those things. Like instead of me trying to come to a cool guitar part, you get these guys to come up with things you never thought of, and it's like that's awesome. And my job would just be pointing things out, like that, this, that, the other. And it's like it just makes your job so much easier. So that's the first thing you can do. Now, as far as choosing the talent as the artist, you have to look a little harder for that. But if at least you have a backbone of studio musicians and great people around you, it just makes your job so much easier because the drums will always sound great. The snare will sound great. The kick will sound great because you hired a great drummer to do all that stuff. You know what I mean? So it just, it pays to just pay people to do who are great at those particular jobs. At least that's one of the tips I learned early on. Instead of hiring, your friend who can play drums, who has a drum kit, because no matter what you do, those drums, it's just not going to sound as good. Those guys know how. And my uncle Ronnie, who's actually the drummer in the Chicago, the play Chicago on Broadway, best thing he ever told me. He's like, one of the things I learned early on. He played on so many records back in the 50s, and I'm trying to forget the big one he played on. Barry Manilow's his big hit. But one of the things he taught me early on was, as a drummer, he'd sit in the in the music room playing the drums, but he'd always go in the control room and listen to how it sounded in there. Because what you hear in the drum room is not what you hear through those speakers. And the only thing that matters is what translates through those speakers. So like one thing you learn early on as a drummer is that tom fills don't sound so great on a pop record. They just don't cut through. You start going, it just gets long. Yes, but snare fills sound great. So when you play things like blah, 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 like on a snare, it just cuts through everything. So you start changing the way you play drums based on that stuff. Or you play a kick drum consistently, because if you play a kick hard and soft, it gets lost on a pop record. It gets lost. But when you hit that kick the same way every time, you go and listen to the speakers, it just translates, but right there. So all those things that you didn't think were important when you're practicing, you re-practice how you play as a drummer because you realize it's got to translate to the speakers that way. And that's the difference between a good drummer and a great studio drummer. Those great studio drummers like Steve Gadd and I'm forgetting the other guy from LA. You hire those guys and you have to do so little. You put the microphones in any spot you want to put them, and you just tell them what you want, and like they play it in 2 passes, and it's like, this is done. This is a record. You know what I mean? They've done it so many times. It just makes your life so much easier.
That's such a good point. I have kind of question on the reverse of that, which is now there's so I have like a lot of people who I'm teaching who are subscribed to these types of services that they give you like stems of a record and you mix it and you can get feedback for it. And I always feel like that's a really good practice and such a good resource to have. And usually they're not so expensive. So I'm all for it that way. But I feel like they miss out on a part of the process, which is they get stuff that's so good, it's easier to mix them. So then when they're starting to record their own stuff at home, like from those stems, they haven't really learned how to make like a home recording because there's a lot more process. Like what they get is already declicked. What they get is already doesn't have clicks and pops in it, So what do you think about that? Like if you want to record at home, should you start with like crappy stuff? What do you think about home recording? Like, should people just not do it if it sounds bad?
Well, if you're not interested in home recording at all, you just want to be a mixer, then I guess it makes sense to just be a mixer. But I haven't checked out the files you're talking about. If they are processed or sound good, you should definitely try to find ones that don't sound good. Get them from other places. If you have no interest in recording yourself. But if you have an interest in recording yourself, I would start with recording before mixing, because it takes so long to be good at mixing, where you can be good at recording within a couple of years, where the first 10 to 15 years of everything I mix, I would throw away because it's just garbage to me. Like I can mix it half the time or a third of the time now, just because your ears just get better, and mixing, it's just one of those things that's like, you don't even think about it at some point. I used to call it magic fingers, because I worked under some great mixers like Mike Barbiero, Steve Thompson, and some other guys like that. And watching how they work is so important because you see how effortless it is for them, because they don't do such crazy things. They just listen for certain things and they know what they're looking for. They know what the most important thing is, that the vocal sits right here in the mix, where the snare sits, where the guitar sits. Like they learn where the things should be and they feel confident about that. And when you're first starting out, you're not going to have any of that confidence. Everything's a wide open thing. You know what I mean? It's like once you get the confidence, it's like playing a sport. When you're shooting a basketball, shooting a shot that you've shot a million times, you kind of know what you're doing. So you have that confidence you're doing it, as opposed to someone picking a ball for the first time and taking a shot or swinging a baseball bat. You know what I mean? So once you have that confidence you could do it, it just makes everything so much easier. So I used to call it magic fingers, because I used to go downstairs, make some coffee for someone, come back upstairs, and like they didn't do anything to the mix, but it sounded better just because they sat down at the console and played around with a few things. And they would have no idea what I'm talking about. You have magic fingers. Like, no, I just play with things. And it's like, no, you just you sitting at the console changes that. And it's so hard to explain it to people who don't get that. But that comes, it could take a decade to figure that out.
Where you copy exactly what they do and it just doesn't sound like.
I used to have a B team with me that I used to give them my template. And I used to do a lot of it with the pop records. I do the same thing. I use the same snare sample, same kick, and I give it to them, and they give it back to me some stuff that they did and with my templates. And I'm like, I couldn't try, and I'm not trying to insult them if they're watching this, but I couldn't try. I don't know how they made what I gave them sound so bad, because what I gave them sounded good when it started. But it's not because they're bad. It's just I don't know how to explain it. It's like when certain people touch a fader that have that confidence, it's different than when someone who has no idea when they touch the fader has the same confidence. When they boost like 16K on a bass, there's no reason to ever boost 16K on a bass. There's no sound there, but they don't know anything. It's just they start playing with it, as opposed to like someone who's done it before. I only touch the frequencies. I listen to it first, and I know right away I'm going to do this, and this. And you have to get to that point, and it takes a long time because, I mean, back in the day, I was doing it for a living, 12 hours a day, 6 days a week of constant mixing or recording. So I'm not saying you couldn't catch up to that, but it's a lot, to catch up to that level. And I started recording really bad bands. And then when I started recording good bands, I had to relearn it all over again because, it's completely different. All the things you're worried about in the first things when you're recording bad music. And that's the thing I talked about before. When you start working with great bands who write good songs, everything just gets so much easier. And you don't realize that. You think you're just not doing a good enough job. I've only been doing this for a year. It's like, no, you're recording people who've only been playing music for a year. So it's you can't tune a violin played by a 12-year-old child and it's going to sound great. They have to play the instrument great too. And then, like I said before, if they do, then you don't have to do anything. Just put the mic anywhere and it'll sound great. But to answer, I hope I answered your question in some way. If you're really interested in the recording process, I would definitely record as much as possible because I think you can get further learning how to record and worry about the mixing later as you go along.
That's a great, it definitely confirms like what I was thinking. So I'm happy about that. X-Rame is asking, you're like one of the kind of early adopters of Reaper in this like pro producer community. So like what kind of gave you the confidence to make the switch to it? Because he's saying, and we've all seen it, where people kind of are doubting making, like they like Reaper, but they have some doubts. They always ask about like, oh, well, which professionals are using Reaper? So what was the process for you where you were like, because your first video on REAPER Mania is actually a Pro Tools video, and then very quickly, really? I think there? By video 5 or 6, you switched to Reaper, and then you're full-time Reaper. So so what happened where you were like, I'm out, Reaper, you're in, you're it?
Well, I was making videos for Reaper while I was still using Pro Tools professionally. Because I had a Pro Tools system. I don't even know what they were called at the time. It was like an HD system. So when you have that system, all the DSP is built into the cards.
Yep. That's how they get you.
And so it was a kind of hard. And back at the time, the computers weren't as fast as they are now. So if I was using Reaper back then, maybe I would get 20 tracks, where in Pro Tools I was getting 128 tracks. So because I was guaranteed with the DSP built into those cards, and I was just used to that workflow. There's a difference between playing around with something at home and sitting in front of a client. So it was a good 2-3 years where I was not comfortable using Reaper in front of a client because I hadn't figured it all out yet. Even though I was making tutorials on early stages, I didn't feel comfortable using it in front of clients yet because I was just so used to that Pro Tools workful. I just switched one day where I was just like, there was some kind of upgrade that I had to make on Pro Tools, and I was just like, I ain't doing it anymore. Mm-hmm. The computers are fast enough. I really want to go in this direction where I hate the idea of any kind of system that locks you out. I mean, the whole world is filled with, Justin said it on the podcast with you guys, the world is filled with people putting in effort so that you can't use the product you paid for. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. We all have password managers filling all this different thing out. And if I can't tell you how many times I've decided to use a real complicated password to use a plugin, that it saved that password in my browser, but then I open up Reaper and the plugin, and I can't copy and paste it from one to the other. It's like your clipboard is empty. So I have to type out the entire password. I'm like, I'm a paying customer. You're doing this to non-paying customers, and look how inconvenienced I am. And you've put people to work to make that system just to stop me from doing work today. I made a video on guitar emulations, and I'm going to call out this company because I'm pissed at them. I spent $250 on that Bias Peak Pro guitar thing, which sounds great. I love it, but I didn't make the video on it. I used Easy Mix thing that they gave me an NFR for because I couldn't get the thing to work quickly while I was making the video. Because I had every month or two, because I don't use it that often, every month or two they ask you to put the password in again and sign on and download their new client, their new software that you have to use with it. And it's like, I don't want to do this. I just want to use the software I paid for. So I didn't use the Bias FX Pro, whatever guitar thing in the video. I used this Easy Mix thing in it because I was like, I'm just not going to waste my time, even though I paid for the damn thing. So I love that part of Reaper where it's like, and this is another thing that changed my mind completely. I was working somewhere in New York City, and I was out at my manager's office who didn't have a obviously audio setup, and they needed an edit tomorrow for something was going on the radio. So it was like a radio edit they had to cut a chorus out of, and I was like, well, I don't have my Pro Tools rig with me, and my rig, I have to drive 15 minutes downtown to get it, turn it on, and that Pro Tools rig took about 15 minutes to turn on before it booted up and I could run Pro Tools. So I was in the manager's office. I'm like, give me your laptop. And I downloaded Reaper. I took the file that they sent me on the email, and I did the edit right in his office in 5 minutes, sent it to the radio station, and it was on the radio the next day. And I was like, this is amazing. This is where we should be. I shouldn't have to drive downtown to use my Pro Tools system. I can download Reaper and use it today. And they don't even care if I didn't put in my password to use it. Like I had paid for it. And I've paid for Reaper every time I could or needed to, but I didn't have to use it, which is what Justin talked about. It's like, if you need to use this product, just use it. It's here for you. You know what I mean? I'm not going to go through the time it takes to stop you from using it for the people who paid for it. Meanwhile, the people who steal it don't pay anything.
Yeah.
They get away with everything.
When they have like a software installer, but then you have to type in the serial number. It's like, then why did I get this other thing? It's
And you have to download other challenge and response, and it's just more hoops and more hoops, and it's like when you get to the point where you make me that inconvenience, you make me question whether how much I really like that plugin. And there's at least 5 or 6 plugins where I've gone, as I bought new systems, I was like, I'm not even going to install it. I barely use it, and I'm not going to spend 10, 15 minutes getting you to know that I bought this thing. So I just don't use it. And I paid for it.
Yeah.
It's like I'd rather use ReEQ, or you'd rather use something that a company's giving away for free or easy. You know what I mean? Like Stillwell charges for their product, but I know I could still use it because, you know what I mean, they don't turn it off the way these other companies do. I just prefer that ethos, obviously.
And the quality of free stuff is going up a lot. So like people who are charging for your plugins, you got to really step up your game, because people are making just the craziest stuff. And
you're paying for a very pretty looking plugin.
Right. Yeah.
I can make videos about all those pretty looking plugins compared to Reaper plugins, and no one's going to hear the difference.
You should do it. Do some hit pieces.
But then all those companies are going to come after me. They all think I hate them anyway.
Lots of people are asking Kenny about the record behind you. So you want to give us the story?
I absolutely hate people who do this, who put their gold record behind them. But it was totally by accident. If you notice in my videos, I usually shoot from over there, pointing at the front of my thing. But in order to do that, I wouldn't be able to look at your faces because I need to see a monitor over here. So I had to switch the whole thing around. So now everybody's seeing this side of the room where I actually have more. I have Hope You Dance is down there, the platinum one. That's Sex and Candy, which is Musty Playground. And I have 2 more over there and then 2 more in the back there. But I hate people who do that. Like they put their gold record in the shot. And I was doing this last night and I'm like, oh man, my gold record's in the shot. So I take it down. So I don't.
Have you gotten a gold play button from YouTube for hitting 100K?
It's sitting on the floor.
I
haven't found a place for it yet. I want to mat it with like a black mat around it, so it looks a little nicer. I got a place for it somewhere up here, but this is one of my favorite things right now because it's at least more recent, as opposed to those records over there.
That's awesome. Yeah, a lot of people show that. I kind of like that, but then I found out that some people like pay 10 grand to get one and then they hide their subscriber count. I'm like, why? Like that's your investment into YouTube. Oh. Yeah, it's like, why don't you just buy a nice camera and get the actual subscriber? Like, you know, you can spend that 10 grand on content.
It's not an award. The thing that made me so happy about it is not the award. It's that I actually got is that I actually earned the award at some point. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And I really didn't earn the award because obviously people are paying me to make these videos. It's a lot harder to make the money completely with, you know, YouTube money to keep it going. You know what I mean? If you don't have enough views, it's hard to like wake up in the morning and go, I'm gonna make another video. But the one thing that's good about, I always say to lesser people with less subscribers, is that it does multiply. You know what I mean? You think getting from 500 to 1,000 subscribers was a lot harder than getting from 10,000 to 20,000 or 20,000.
Right.
I mean, the multiply gets easier because it's just like a snowball. As it goes down, it gets easier and easier, and YouTube will start recommending your videos more. So it's definitely easier as it goes along. Like I assume, I don't know if we'll ever get to 1 million, but getting to 100,000 probably is harder than getting to 1 million. Probably took longer anyway. But I mean, we're very specific, so.
Did you make free Reaper tutorials for a while and then you were approached by Justin, or how did that work? Like, how did you two find each other and
I'm
connect?
just trying to think if I never made them for free. I used to work for Groove 3, and I kind of still do. They still sell some of my tutorials, and I still make, a royalty on the ones they sell. But I started out working for them because remember I told you in the beginning where I talked about how I was making Pro Tools. What happened was they came out and reached out to me and they said, your videos are blowing up on the internet. We're going to pay you to start making them. So I started making them. And this is back in the day when we were selling them as DVD. Like people would buy DVDs and they get mailed to your house. So that's what. So, and then eventually it became subscription when everyone had fast enough stuff. And then eventually I started making them for free. But I actually approached Justin because what happened was I was about to make Reaper 4 explained for Groove 3. And what was happening was the subscriber, because their model, the way it works is it was just getting less and less because more people were going for free. You know, back in the day when I was originally making tutorials for them, there weren't a lot of options. I was like the only one making Pro Tools videos, or like, you know, a few other people were making them, and they were charging like $150 for one video, you know, and that was back in the day we could do that. But over time, as we were competing with YouTube, the sales were going lower and lower and lower. So I started realizing YouTube is probably the way to go. So right before I released that, I reached out to him and I said, do you guys want this instead? You know, if you guys will pay me more than they pay me, then it could work out. So he loved the idea because he looks at it as a, you know, value added to Reaper. And then I said, another option is I could also start making them per month for you guys. And he loved the idea as well. And it's been going on for many years at this point. And like I said, I couldn't be happier.
I don't think without you, I would get into Reaper. Like Reaper is complex enough that if it doesn't have a good educator, I think, and it did happen to me. I got Reaper and I was like, okay, this is cool, but I'm already so comfortable. I was using like Logic and Ableton and a little bit of Pro Tools. I said, no, I'm fine. So I didn't like explore it further. And then watching your videos and then through you kind of finding like John Tai, I think it adds like a huge amount of value. And I honestly, like I was telling you before we started streaming, like ScreenFlow is orders of magnitude more simple than Reaper, and it sounds too complex for me because it doesn't have a Kenny Gioia. I gotta like listen to somebody who's like, hey, you know, subscribe to the thing, and then they don't actually tell you the thing, or they like spend a lot of time on the basic stuff and they're like, oh, and then you do that. I'm like, no, tell me that.
I went through that yesterday. The camera I'm using right now is a Sony ZV-1, and just recently, I think about a year ago, they added firmware to it to allow you to stream it. Before that, you couldn't stream with it, I guess. So I had to upgrade the firmware, and it's a multi-page direction on how to do it. And it's not supposed to even work with the Mac Silicon, which is what I'm using, but somehow I made it work. But the step process was so steppy, I'm like, I'm going to find a video on it. And I started watching videos. I watched 10 videos on it. They all described it incorrectly. And so that's the problem with YouTube videos is you don't know. They're not working for the company. So I always kind of look at it like, at least if I do something wrong, they're going to watch the video and go, no, that's not how you explain it. Or at least I'll ask them questions about it. Because I think it's important that the information be correct. You know what I mean? Like, because when you put out a product like the Sony ZV-1 and you have all these third-party people making videos on it, they're representing your company. Because before like I told you before we even shot this, I buy tons of stuff. I buy every little piece of gear you can see, imagine little gadget. But I'm doing it based on YouTube videos. So if they're not working for the company, I'm getting misinformation sometimes. You know, you don't know if you could trust the information or not. And that's where I think it's kind of better that we have a closer relationship there, where it's a more of a value added to the product because I am representing their product and hopefully getting the information a little more correct. Whereas some of these companies are putting out a product and they're relying on people putting out not misinformation, but not the right information. Like you were going through with some ScreenFlow videos. So.
Yeah, and or some companies have tutorials, but it's like half maintained, and it's like
Right.
they have already released version 11, but their tutorials on their website is like version 8. It's like, yeah, like
The impression
get
I
with the
get is
program.
that someone in the company wanted to make those videos, so they went ahead and did it, but it's not like the company was thinking about it.
Hmm.
And these
No.
days, Kenny, how
And
much
that's
of
how we
your
live it.
work is like doing videos for your YouTube channel, and how much of it is like mixing and producing and other things?
Well, producing, I've pretty much stopped probably 3 years ago, just because honestly, I just gotten to the point where I I just didn't enjoy that side of it as much. I was recording a lot of bands, and as much as I love that music, it was just becoming the same work constantly. Like, okay, for the next 3 days we're going to record bass, then we're going to record guitars. We'll do the left guitars, we'll do the right guitars. Okay, now we're doing like, it just got so redundant, and I just wasn't enjoying it as much. The mixing I like because I'm hearing a new song every day. I'm going to mix one song, and that's the song I mix that day, and I'm done with it. So it's still exciting for me. So I still do some mixing work, but I would say now it's probably 25% of what I do is mixing, and 75% is tutorials. That's why one of the things I'm enjoying about doing these kind of streaming things is I want to get into doing some more broad-based production and mixing tutorials where I'm just talking on camera about the kind of stuff of it. So it's expanding that side of it.
Do you also, somebody asked this and I'm kind of ever so slightly rephrasing it, but is teaching something that you kind of studied in a way, or does it come naturally to you, or kind of, because I think the style of your videos, the style of your delivery and stuff hasn't changed much. So yeah, like, did you kind of study how to teach, or did you imitate people who taught you?
No, I think what happens is just over time it evolves. I'm a big fan of evolution of anything, like how things just evolve. Like it could be sports, it could be anything where people figure out what works and they just keep doing that, the thing that works. And I obviously read all my comments on my YouTube, and I read what people do. Like people have said early on, if you watch my earlier tutorials on Groove 3, I was talking fast like this. And foreign people don't speak English as their first language. It's very hard to keep up. And I'll swallow certain letters, and it just becomes a harder thing. So I used to have a thing on my desk that said speak slower, just written right underneath me, speak slower, because I realized I had to start doing that. And what I realized I had to do is people tease me about it because I speak in short little fragments. I can't speak slowly without and have any kind of feeling behind what I say. So I can't just talk like this. So I found that if I talk fast but in shorter pieces, I can then say shorter things at a time. And then people who don't speak English, which a lot of people don't speak English as their first language that watch my videos, love the fact that I slow it down, because you're trying to ingest a lot of information. What I'm making, I don't look at myself as like a typical YouTube creator who's all charisma or, it's personality based. Because in that situation, the way I'm talking right now is fine. You're only picking up on some of the words I'm saying, but you're getting the gist. I could probably talk twice as fast and you still get the gist. But when I'm explaining something you don't understand anything about, like the media item properties, it's kind of good to go, here's the media item properties, here's this first part, because people are intent, they don't understand anything about what they're seeing. So talking slower makes a lot more sense for that kind of content. So I've evolved over time to think about it in terms of someone who doesn't know anything about it. And that's why whenever I show like a preferences or options or opening up, the actions, I always go to the menu and then I always explain what I'm doing, and it bores the hell out of me to keep doing the same thing each time, but I don't know who's watching this video for the first time. I can't assume that you've been watching my videos enough and you've already got it. And that's what always drives me crazy about some other tutorials I've watched where they have everything customized and they just assume everyone's already onto their toolbars. They already know everything they're doing. And I'm not making fun of you, but when I watch a video like that, it's like this. I don't know what I'm seeing because it's just too much. Unless I'm a fan of yours and I've been with you from the beginning, it gets a little hard to follow all those things. That's why I always start with the default theme. I don't change any of my toolbars. I don't change any of my keystrokes. Everything is the default, except for a few little things with the mouse. But because I'm always considering that someone has just downloaded Reaper for the first time and they're learning about this one feature the first time. And
is this for the tutorials, or do you use Reaper like that?
Well, I've kind of forced myself to use Reaper like that too, except for certain things. Like I use portable installs a lot. I have about 12 portable installs that I use for different things. Like when I do Reaper editing is the one where I edit my voice for my screen flows, and all the keystrokes are different for that. I have like if I double click it, it like heals things. Like I do all the things because I'm only using it for a portable install. I'm only using it for one thing, and then I have another one for mixing. I have another one for tracking. So I change all my portable installs and use different keystrokes for everything. But my main one, which I call Reaper Tutorial, that one has everything back to the default as stock. Although I also keep a stock one in case there's some other things that may have changed over time, so that I know, because I always want my screen and everything dialogues open up the way it would for someone who opened it for the first time when they downloaded it.
Mm-hmm. Yesterday, Katie, I was doing Reaper 101.
Sorry. Good.
Yesterday I was doing a Reaper for beginners like workshop, and I had never done it before. And yeah, like I ran into the same problem as you, where I was like, well, okay, I can explain how I edit a podcast, but literally it's all customized. And it's so like, and it kind of gets boring if you're like, oh, like here's how I do things, but I got to show you how to do this and do this. And like showing them the setup, it's so hard to kind of get people, and it's hard to get people attracted to that because it's kind of like, yeah, lots of people aren't into doing that.
As a viewer, you mean, or as a person making the tutorial?
Or as a person who's beginning to learn Reaper. Like, gotcha. At least in my head, I'm like, I try to kind of make it clear that I'm not teaching beginner level Reaper. Right. But yeah, it becomes kind of annoying to explain some stuff because even if you're like showing somebody how you split something, you gotta do like a backstory, add a like tangent into, oh, and this is why the click does this.
No, totally. But I feel like for your videos, if you're showing something very specific, like if you're showing a script, I wouldn't expect everything to go back to the default because you're not showing those things. But if you were showing like, here's how I automate a fader, and then you start clicking buttons where you're switching the different modes, and you know that could be a little more confusing for someone because like this doesn't look like the same program I'm using. You know what I mean? So in those situations, it becomes more important. But like I said, I don't think those same things apply to you. They apply to me. I have to assume that download it for the first time, and sometimes they're watching a video that they shouldn't be watching anyway. You know, I'm showing something that's really intricate, and they need to learn how to figure out how to get the audio interface turned on. And I'm showing them how to, you know, I can't even think of something that's more complicated. So, but I'm always trying to think that someone's watching this video for the first time. And that's my path. That's my lane. You know what I mean? If you just download Reaper the first time, this is what you'd see.
And how do you think that your videos overlap with the manual? Because some people will prefer videos, some people will prefer things in writing. I know that there is a community of people who are visually impaired, so they will not be necessarily watching the videos. They will be reading the manual. So how do you coordinate with the, I guess it's Geoffrey who is writing the manual?
Yeah. Well, there was times when we were going to coordinate different things, but it just came down to the point where I think it was just more difficult for both of us to, he has his style that he does it because he shows examples in the manual as well. He doesn't just write it like a manual. In fact, he calls it a user guide because of that, right? Because he doesn't want it to be like, I cover everything in the most basic possible way. It's not that. And he shows a lot of good examples. And there were times I was thinking of we could share the different examples and stuff, but it just, I think it became a little harder for both of us to do things that way because he has his style of doing it. I love manuals. I read manuals all the time. I read the manual from beginning to end before I started making one Reaper video because I love doing that. But certain people love videos. I mean, the world has changed where people, I have YouTube on all day, reading stuff. I don't usually watch a lot of audio stuff, but I'm always trying to learn something from a video. Anything that's giving me some kind of content that I could learn more about something, I'm watching a YouTube video on it. So, but there are definitely people that prefer to read stuff. The nice thing about reading things is you can read it at your own pace. Like if I'm trying to ingest something complicated, I'll read a page of it and then I'll stop. And I'll just like walk around the house and do something else. And then I'll go back and read another page of it because it could be too much to read a whole chapter of something you don't know about and ingest it all, you know? But there's not really a huge cross section other than the fact that we do talk to each other about what we're covering. Because one thing, if it's worth covering in his manual, it's usually worth making a video about it and vice versa. You know what I mean? We do the bigger stuff we cover, where a lot of the little changes that show up in the change aren't covered by either of us because they're just too small of a change.
Somebody's asking what it was like working with the Spice Girls.
I didn't work with the Spice Girls. I work with a lot of groups like Spice Girls.
Yeah, I thought you worked with Aaron Carter. I know you worked with Aaron
Carter.
Yeah,
He's an interesting character. He's been blowing up on the internet recently.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Well, anyone who's actually knows what Aaron Carter's up to, I usually don't follow him, but every year I'll check up on him. The thing about Aaron Carter, I worked with him when he was 16. He was the same person then that he is now.
Wow.
And I'm not going to say anything bad about him, but I'm just saying he's the same person. So anyone who thinks that the rock and roll lifestyle changed him, no. He was always this person. That's all.
If you're young and you like blow up, it's like, well, this seems to be working. Like when I was 16, I was like, I need to change because this isn't
It's not
working.
I'm very much, when I have friends that have like their kids and want to start like a girl group or a boy group, like back in the day, I wouldn't work with them because I'm like, I don't think it's a good idea. I think it's the best idea is for people to mature and their music success to build onto itself, you know, to have it be an 8 to 10 year plan where you turn it into something and then you've earned it. You know, you get signed by a record label, they drop you. You get signed by another record label, they drop you. And you just work your way up the ladder as opposed to having people around you do all that for you. And then you're 18 years old. And I know this from firsthand information about some of the guys from New Kids on the Block and from Backstreet Boys and the brothers of the people from Backstreet Boys. 18 years old and making $11,000 a month in merch. And like they're on the top of their world when they're 18. And then 19, 20, 30 goes down and their life just gets worse and worse and worse, and they don't understand it because they didn't go through the trouble of getting there in the first place. You know what I mean? So I'm very much against that quick fame. It could happen, but it's not a good thing for people's psyche. You know, if like I have a son, and I would very much prefer if he became an artist that he would struggle the first few years and figure it out, as opposed to like becoming a huge superstar right away and then slowly having it go
Yeah.
Because
and having a manager, a producer, like you don't need to learn that stuff. They just set it up for you. You just show up, and you think that's how it happens. Like
you just don't understand it, and you start thinking. Like I saw with a lot of those guys I would work with, where they thought they didn't understand why they had to share the money they were making, and they're like, because their name was on the billboard, and it's like there's like 100 people behind you that got your name on the billboard. You know, I'm not saying I should get a bigger piece of it than you did, but like there's people who wrote the song, there's people who produced the record, there's your managers, there's a lot of people that it takes to be who you are. So unfortunately, it does take a lot of splitting of that thing, but a lot of times it goes to their head like, my name's on the billboard. That's what everyone's coming here to see. I'm like, yeah, but that's not really how it happened. You know, it takes but people who struggle, you know, in their 17, 18, 19, 20 as an artist, they understand that because they are their manager, they are their songwriter, they are all those people along the way. So they pay their dues kind of thing. And I'm not saying you should really feel like crap for 10 years to earn it, but you understand it a little better, you know? So I think that's a healthier thing for psych. The thing I always feel strongly about is people are famous for their content, not for just being famous. You know what I mean? Like if you do something that people love you for, that's more important because it's something solid that you can keep giving to people as opposed to being, you know, famous for being famous. And I'm not going to talk about individual people there, but you know what I mean? It's like, it's more sustainable, you know what I mean? As opposed to, and again, I'm not going to go on the other side of it, but if you've built yourself a talent, then that becomes, you understand, you have respect for that talent and you have respect for why you became famous or even slightly famous for that talent. As opposed to it being like, look how hot I am.
Right. I know you like pop music. I think a lot of people know. You talked about in the other stream too. Somebody's asking, and this is a hard question to answer, but some of your favorite records, and in terms of production, not necessarily like music writing.
Well,
like
if you're
best
talking
drum sound, they're saying, etc.
Best drum sound. Best drum sounds. Well, if we're just going straight pop, I know it sounds crazy for my age to like BTS or Hot Pink or any of those boy band, girl band things, but their songs are strong, which I always feel like the most important thing. What's that?
It's like the front. It's like the newest thing. It's state of the art, like music. You can't argue with it.
No, but the songs are good. Like if you go back in time to like New Kids on the Block back in the day, they were a bunch of cute little boys with not very good songs. They were like Kids Bop quality songs. They were crappy songs, but they were cute little kids, so they became famous for that. But over time, I was talking about evolution before, it evolved to you have to have great songs. And like bands like BTS and Dua Lipa, and those songs are good songs. You know, they Silk Sonic, any of that pop music that has I mean, Anderson .Paak is such an amazing drummer. When he hits the snare drum, the way he hits the hi-hat, you know, those double hits. I mean, I have such an appreciation for people who just really can play and really can make sounds out of those things. And they can't make a wrong note. And if they make a wrong note, it sounds intentional, which is, you know, I mean, it's just so much talent on those things. So my favorite things are like Silk Sonic and And the production on the Dua Lipa stuff is amazing. There's a lot of good pop stuff out there right now. So I'd say any of those kind of things. I mean, even going back to the day with like Katy Perry, those songs were so strong as well. Like they were just undeniable. You know what I mean? And one of the things I always feel weird about with pop music, because people feel like I got to defend myself with it. But pop music really is a hard thing to make because it really combines so many different things and it has to appeal to so many different people. Like, you know what I mean? If you're doing, and I'm not knocking metal or grunge or any of those kind of things, but a lot of those have built-in fans because they expect you to do a certain type of thing. Where pop music, there's no expectations of what you're doing. There's no instrumentation on the production. Like you could have a kick and snare. You could have no snare. You could just have claps. You could have no drums. You know what I mean? You could have strings. You could have no strings. You could have a guitar. You have no guitar. There's infinite amount of possibility of instrumentation and production you could have. But the most important thing is that you move people. You know what I mean? And that's a hard thing to do, and move people across different generations. There are people that like country music that only like country music, but they'll still like this pop song. You know what I mean? And it goes across all those different things. So if you can get all those different things together, that to me is the hardest thing to write. To write a great pop song has got to be the hardest type of song to write because you have to reach all different genres of people to like it.
I love people who make like a kind of niche genre and they're like, oh, well, bro, I can make like $100,000 a year if I decide to make pop. It's like, do it then. I would love to see that. Like, if you think pop is like, oh, Pam, like, get out of here.
No, they think it's the easiest thing. It is easy to write a pop song. It's hard to write a great pop song because I could spend 10 minutes right now writing a pop song, but it would take 100
before
it was a great
chords. Yeah.
It's easy to follow the formula. That's not that hard. But the hard part is making it great. And that little bit of greatness really is, I always describe it as, because pop music tends to give you what you expect. You know what I mean? It's like a movie that you've seen before, like a romantic comedy. You kind of know the points that are going to happen. They're going to introduce each character. You kind of know those different things. But what makes a great romantic comedy or makes a great pop song is they flip just a little bit to make it more interesting than everything you've experienced before. Because you've heard those 4 chords before. And I can write a song right now with those 4 chords. But unless I do something a little bit different to make it more interesting than everything that's come before it, nobody's going to care about it. Because like I said, anybody can write a song with those 4 chords. But it makes it harder because you have to write a great song with those 4 chords. You know what I mean? You don't have the ability to write those complicated. Oh, Silk Sonic does it all the time with those complicated chords. But writing a great song with 4 chords is hard because you have to make something about it that twists enough, whether it's the lyric or just something enough to grab people that's beyond what anyone that did before you. So it's a hard thing to do. And that's what greatness is, though. You know, like I said, with movies, with a book, with any kind of story, it's people expect a certain amount to be part of it. But at the end of the day, you have to do something original in there that's great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, nothing's easy. Like I hate when people like knock each other's stuff, you know, like, oh, the metal dude doesn't like the pop dude's like, everybody, why can't we all be friends, man? But like there's so much to learn also from stuff you don't. So I never I mixed a reggae song once, but it was so educational because I had to take a deep dive into the genre, see what people are doing. Like it's good to be so open to stuff. Totally. And yeah, like with pop music, like you were saying, I think like I like that kind of harmonic complexity is becoming part of the pop vocabulary. Like people are cool with it. Nobody's like doing a double take when the.
But you have to do it slowly. You can't just right into it. You have to do it slowly. A weird chord here and there. Weird chord here and there. Just slowly educate the public to a little bit of different sounds and here and there. But you notice it even with tutorials. When you first started making a tutorial, you thought you put your camera on, it's no big deal. And then you do it, you're like, this is harder than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
You know, everything's harder than it looks a lot easier when you watch other people do it. Like, I could do that. I could just turn on the camera and start being funny.
A lot of the questions remaining are asking you for features, so don't ask Kenny about features.
You can ask me about features.
Okay.
I mean, I'm not. There's no secrets to give away. I think Justin and Schwa covered it in their thing. People seem to think. Here's the example I felt when I was watching Justin's podcast last night. Do you ever have that thing where people think they'll go into a Target or a Walmart and they think in the back room it's like 3 times as big as what's in the front? That's what people think what's going on a Reaper. They think in the back room of Reaper there's all these features that are just not finished, that are all done. But it's not true at all. It's not true at all. the amount of things that people don't know about in Reaper that are, people who go into the pre-thread. If you're in the pre-threads, 98% of what's going on. You really do. The media lanes, maybe there's one little part of it that they're talking about that you guys don't know about, but for the most part, they don't hold things back. There aren't these, like people say, like, what's going on in Reaper 7? I promise you, nobody on this planet knows what's going to be in Reaper 7.
So I have sort of a meta question related to this then, which is you tend not to cover SWS extensions in your regular videos or even the Reaper scripts in Repack and all of that stuff. So my question is, what are some of the hidden gems that you like from these packages and things that you don't necessarily cover in your videos because they don't really fit, but you like or you would like people to know about?
Well, just so you know, the reason I've slowly, if you notice, more recently covered a few things here and there. The problem with it, and it wasn't a big discussion, but I think the overall feeling is that if I cover something, then it's an endorsement of it. And the one problem with anything that they made, and we notice all the time with the theme, me and White Tie talk about it all the time, is when someone takes a White Tie theme or any theme, and this actually happened with Reaper a while ago. When I first started using Reaper, there's a friend of mine named Brandon who might be watching this. He downloaded a Reaper, and the first thing he does, he installed it wasn't just a theme, it was a theme that came with scripts to make Reaper work like Pro Tools. And he came to me a week later and he goes, Pro Tools doesn't work right. I'm trying to do this stuff with sends and nothing's working. I was like, well, show me what you're doing. And it was all these scripts that were set up to work like Pro Tools that was breaking some of the function in Reaper. So what happens, and we see it happen with themes, we see it happen with scripts, is that people download a whole bunch of stuff as their first experience with Reaper, and then that becomes their feeling about Reaper. So if something doesn't work in Reaper, now it's not Reaper's fault. I mean, you see, like I say, they say it all the time. Those guys work every day trying to make Reaper as stable as possible. So many of the things, the bug fixes and stuff, because they don't want anything to be broken. And things just break. That's how software works. But they can't control what other people make. So if an SWS extension, and I've used the SWS extensions, they work great, but I've made a video on them, which is on Groove 3. A few of them don't work 100% right. And if you're downloading SWS extensions because I told you to, and they don't work right, then your feeling about Reaper could be based on that and not based on anything they have any control over. And the same thing happens with themes. Someone will change a White Tie theme or any theme, and something doesn't work right, and then he can only update his own theme. He can't update what you updated, because he would be going crazy. Every time someone updates his theme, he's got to now fix something on your theme. He can't do that. So anytime there's something broken on his, he'll fix it, but he can't fix everyone else's. So if I show off too many XWS extensions or the REAPER, which I think the REAPER's amazing, but it's so much to ask people to download that is not being supported. I mean, officially supported or bug fixed. So it becomes harder for me to be an endorsement of those things. So that's the reason I don't cover those things. So if I do cover them, I'll cover them with like not a script, but more like a cycle actions I did very recently after what you did, because I don't think that can really break. Could be wrong. It could break, but as long as, but I mean, if those kind of things start breaking for people, it becomes a reflection on Reaper. And as me, as a person who works for Reaper, obviously it becomes a reflection there too. So I love the fact that all these people make all these different things, but there's a difference between when Reaper makes something and when a third party person makes it. And it's the downside of that, because we're being judged, like the guy I was talking about before, Brandon, he almost stopped using Reaper because of it. And I was like, no, throw all that stuff out, start Reaper from scratch. I always tell people, don't try to use themes that look like Pro Tools or Logic, or try to make Reaper behave like what it isn't. Learn Reaper the way it is. And then if you want to bring all that stuff back, but there's a lot of things that Reaper can do that those programs can't do. And that becomes very limiting when you try to make it behave like the other things. So I'm very much against too much of that stuff, especially too early. Like then downloading REAPER is the first thing you do when you open Reaper. It's great that those things exist, but I think it's better to learn the foundation of how Reaper works and then slowly work your way up to some extensions and scripts and all that kind of stuff like that. Does that answer that question?
Do your own exploring, because I
Absolutely.
feel like also like with REAPER, like when you enter that world, you also have to enter a world where you don't need to constantly go like ask Kenny when something goes wrong. You need to get into a mindset of like, I need to fix this, or I need to like find a workaround, like investigate on my own.
Like when you're writing a script, because I know you write scripts, is the most fun part of it writing the script, or the idea of coming up with like what I needed to do? Like I needed to do this, 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 and this. Let me figure out how to write the script, and then I could do that. Like that whole thing is a fun thing to create. Like that's part of it. Like again, back to the process I was talking about before. The process of thinking out these things. Like I could show you, and I'm not going to, all my quick keys I use because I use so many other programs. Keyboard Maestro is one of the ones I use, where I have so many things automated. I can hit a key and do so many different things in one keystroke. I enjoy thinking of those things, not just having it all done for me. You know what I mean? So that's part of the process of it, and I think Reaper allows that. Like Pro Tools doesn't allow any of that stuff. You know what I mean? If you have to use all third-party stuff, but where Reaper, you can change any keyboard shortcut to do almost anything. So and create custom actions right in the program. So, but I think it's great that people learn that along the way, as opposed to just being inundated right away.
Mm-hmm.
But would you say that's part of the fun of it, right?
Yeah, Leandro, talk to us about Auto Mixer.
Well, for me, I think that the most satisfying part of writing scripts is when people get back to me and show stuff that they did and that was only possible or that was easier to do because of the scripts I wrote. For me, that's the most fun part.
Absolutely. That's cool.
Somebody was asking, we went over the favorite records section. But so this question, and I don't know if you want to answer this or not, like your online courses, apart from what you put on your channel, have they been like profitable for you? Are you planning to release more, or are you now at a place where like your channel is fine enough what it does for you?
Well, the courses, like I said, I did say before during recording about Groove 3, right? We discussed that here. I forget what we talked about before.
I guess they're asking if it's profitable. I think this person is trying to get into making audio production content and stuff. So they're wondering kind of, from that angle.
I would move past trying to sell it, because that's what I was originally doing in the sales part of it. I was doing in the beginning when we were selling DVDs actually, and slowly as YouTube became a competitor for it, it became a little bit less profitable. I still love Groove 3. I still talk to those guys all the time. I still make some money off of the old videos I made with them. But any content I make at this point, I would always try to do it through YouTube or any kind of a streaming service where it's free, and then you just make the ad revenue from it. Now the ad revenue isn't that great, but if you build a successful enough channel, you can definitely make ad revenue that's high enough. So I would go that route as opposed to being so exclusive where you're charging for people, unless you're making something specific that you can sell. But like if you're competing with YouTube on that same area, like production, mixing and stuff, in fact, I might go in that area. I would do it for free and give it away on YouTube and live on the money you make from YouTube. But you do have to have a big enough following on YouTube to make money doing it. But that's the way to go, to build a following that way.
Yeah, I think these days it would be really hard to start from selling unless you're like, oh, well, I got a Grammy or whatever it is that people think makes a good, educator, and then go from there. Leandro, one more question that's very technical, so let me know if you want to talk about this. Somebody asked, you mentioned this in the other live stream, where to print stems, you sidechain the master compressor to every single stem so that it sounds like you had it. Could you talk about that process and maybe how you kind of would go about setting that up in Reaper to people?
Well, I definitely try to avoid doing that because it's it's a tricky subject, and I don't think I've ever gotten it right when I've worked with. Anytime you do with movies and commercials and stuff like that, they usually want to have stems, and you want to be able to put everything back into the order. But they don't understand the fact that like back in the day when I was doing a lot of that stuff, I had two different compressors, I had a multi-band compressor, and then I have a limiter on the master 2-bus. And when you do that, you need to sidechain everything so that every stem is seeing things, even if it's not hearing them. In other words, the kick and snare is still triggering that master bus, even though the kick and snare isn't in that stem. So you have to basically, I can't really explain it. You basically have to send everything to a separate bus and send that to each one of those plugins. But it gets complicated when you start layering multiple ones, because now the first plugin needs to see what the second plugin is seeing, and so on and so forth. So what I started doing was, and it just makes the most sense, is whenever you're doing commercials or movies or anything it's going to be like that, I try to use less plugins. If you just use one on the stereo bus, then you can just sidechain all of them once, and then to have them all triggered that way. So if you're using like one compressor on the stereo bus, that would be the compressor that would be sidechained from everything. So now it's getting a feed from everything, and then you just choose to turn off those tracks, but every other one is still being fed. It's really kind of hard to describe it without being in Reaper, but that's the concept of it.
We saw the diagram you drew in the air.
Oh, okay.
So you have a track that kind of goes before the master track, but is in essence taking in all the tracks, and then that's okay. Gotcha.
Right, so that's what's triggering each compressor. But each compressor needs to have a sidechain ability. Like back in the day when I was doing that, some of the plugins I had weren't even sidechainable, so it wasn't even possible to really do some of these things. So I spent hours trying to figure out the best way to handle it. A lot of times I would redo my mix to make it work with the lesser plugins on the master bus and just put them on the buses and things like that. It's hairy to get that perfect.
Yeah, when it comes to films, this is also a thing that's done. But then the issue becomes like in a TV show, sometimes they may take the dialogue or take the music, like when they're doing like previously on blah, blah, blah. They would take the music and then they would take bits of the dialogue and put it over. So they're reassembling a cut from the stems, but the music is still like reacting to a duck that happened that doesn't happen. And it makes it like, it makes it.
Because they didn't do it right.
Yeah.
And I had some top of the line mixers send me those instrumental mixes and a cappella mixes to put things together, and they didn't do any of the things I'm saying, like reacting to drums or reacting to the vocals, and I could tell that they were both processed completely separately. They didn't use any kind of sidechaining, because when you do the sidechaining, it sounds really weird. You know, the vocal is jumping up and down in volume, triggering to things you're not hearing, but then you put it back together, it's the exact same mix. But I've had the biggest mixers in the world send me stuff, and they didn't do that. And I had to kind of, fudge it, because they had the mix, like the whole mix would stop and the compression would come up because the vocal was happening there, and there would be no vocal. And I'm like, they didn't sidechain this. They just turned off the vocals, printed a mix, turned off the drums and guitars, sent me a mix. I'm like, it's not really the right way to do it, but some people get lazy, and that's good.
How do you patch that up, or what do you do to kind of get around that as a mixer?
You just got to ride the faders. You just got to bring the vocal up, and when it sounds like it's coming down, I'll bring the drums up. When they're coming up and down.
For musicians who kind of send stuff to be mixed as stems, from your point of view of being a mixer, what are the criteria when you receive a stem that you're like, okay, everything is how I like it?
Well, it would have to sound great, I guess.
But like, I don't know, in terms of kind of the nitty gritty stuff, like you get stems and you're like, oh, they did it right. What are some of the like criteria there? Well,
the frequencies would have to be balanced. Like if you're sending me a drum stem and the kick is dark and the snare is super bright, then I can't brighten up the kick without, doing the snare. So if everything is at least equally balanced and too bright or too dark, I could at least fix that. But at least have it all sonically or tonally be even sounding, so I would prefer that. But I always prefer to have everything separated as much as possible. I don't like to work with stems. It sounds like a good idea, but the problem is I'm not the one creating the stems, so it's
yeah. Oh, you like getting like elements, like multi-tracks, and then
every track separate. Every track assembled as much as possible. I mean, it's quicker to mix stems, but you don't have any control over certain things. So
right. I'm always like, is it quicker?
Well, it's not quicker because you're fighting it constantly.
Yeah.
One of the things that used to drive me crazy, and I started doing this a while ago, and I feel bad doing it to artists, but I tell them, I don't want you sending me any kind of files at all. Don't send me the Pro Tools session. Don't send me the Reaper session. Only send me WAV files. Because then then it's on them to give me the correct stuff. Because what would happen was people would send me the Pro Tools file it never happened with Reaper, with the Pro Tools file, and they would do all kinds of funky stuff. Like they would make parallel compression, like 4 different parallel compressors on the drums, but some would have only overheads and rooms. Some would only have the bottom snare and the toms. And sometimes they would just make mistakes. But I always take it as like the way a doctor takes it, like don't mess up anything they were doing. So I would try to consider everything they were doing. But now I'd spend a day learning what they did with this project. And after a while, I was like, this is too much work, because I would talk to them later and they go, oh, no, I didn't care about any of that stuff. It didn't matter to me. But I was trying to preserve what they did, even though I didn't understand what they did. So after a while, I was like, no, just send me WAV files. Just give me kick, snare, because then I don't have to think about what they did. I just have what they have. So at least it's less to think about. You know what I mean? Someone else's project. I once had a project sent to me on Reaper, I don't even know the person's name, so I hope it's not you out there. It was like 512 tracks on Reaper. And the reason it was 512 tracks is not because it was 512 instruments. It's because every time this person sang or played a guitar part, they put it on a different track. So when you opened it up, I have two 32-inch monitors right here. I still couldn't see all the tracks. And it would be like this person sang one line here, one line here. It was everywhere. And I was like, it's going to take me 3 days just to go through this project to see what you did. So I just said, I can't mix this. Because it was just because if I have to figure out because I have to get into their head, and unless I'm sitting next to me to get in their head, that's why it's so much easier. Just give me a WAV file, give me a vocal track, give me the drum track. Individual tracks, but everything has to be put together. I don't want 30 tracks of lead vocal that are all recorded at different times with different mics and stuff like that. You put it together and do the best you can, and I'll do the best I can to mix it. But I can't. It's just too much pre-production in the mix, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess it's easier also to like assemble your own mix based on like order. Whenever you try to give people a procedure like, oh, put the drums on top and vocals on the bottom or so, it still kind of goes wrong.
Well, some people will do it in the order of what happens in the song. They'll have like the whole track for the intro over here, and then the whole bunch of tracks here for the verse, and a whole track, and it's like, I can't work that way. Like I need everything straight across the whole song. But if it works for them, that's fine. But then I have to mix it that way. You know what I mean? Because it's like they put the drums, the kick is on now 7 different tracks, and the snares on 7 different tracks, and they're all in different folders, and each folder is compressed differently, and folders within folders. And this one they did a sub project with it, and it's like, that's great. That's for you, but that's for you. As a mixer, I don't want that. Give it to me as simple as possible, because like it's just. Because like I don't want to ruin anything you did, and I'll spend 3 days trying to make sure I don't do that, and that's just not a good use of any of our times. So that's why I just take WAV files. Just send me WAV files. I don't care if you did it in Reaper. Just give me a WAV file.
Right. Somebody's asking what's your favorite limiter, and earlier somebody asked what's your favorite Cocos plugin.
Cocos plugin? I do use all of them almost exclusively, just because they're always there. I never click on a Reaper plugin and it pops up and asks me for something. And I tend to use things very infrequently. So like if I have a certain guitar plugin, like I mentioned before, I'll use it so infrequently that every time I click it, it asks me for something, some kind of a new software to download with it. Or I'm like, don't ask me for something. I just wanted to EQ something. So I tend to go for re-EQ for EQ. I tend to use ReaComp for compressors. I really like the 1175 compressor also. That's what it is, right? The 1175. Although Justin gets mad when I don't mention the General Dynamics as much as the 1175. I love that one too. It's just not as simple. The controls, I think, can get yourself in a little more trouble with General Dynamics. But the thing I love about General Dynamics is that if you're trying to teach someone about compression, it's the best plugin for that, because it shows you exactly what's happening. It shows you that line that's coming across, and this is exactly what's happening, and here's your ratio. So it's very easy to understand it. Here's what a gate does. Here's a ratio for the gate. You can do inverted compression. So I love it for explaining compression. But 1175 I use a lot, and the ReaComp is great as well. I don't think I use any EQ for any besides Re-EQ. I use Limit, which I like, but some of my old projects I was using Event Horizon limiter. So I just don't change it because it's already on there. But if I'm starting anything, from scratch, I'll use, Limit. Any other? I don't think there's any third-party plugins that I use constantly anymore, because like I was saying before, a few of them required so many things to update that I stopped using them because it was just too much trouble. And I just changed. If you have to, like a few years ago, probably like 3-4 years ago, there was I don't know if anyone caught this, a mix off between me and Steven Slate. And we were trying to, and I said, I can outmix you if I mix everything in using only Reaper plugins. And the whole battle being like, because you don't really need to pay for Slate plugins. And I wasn't trying to be a jerk. I was just saying, here's a good fun battle. So he mixed it. I mixed my track, but at that point, I never mixed anything using only stock plugins. I still had a few compressors, like the glue compressor, and a few TC plugins I was using. So it was the first time I ever did it, but I forced myself to do it. I wasn't going to break the rules. And it taught me how to mix with just the stock plugins. And if you're forced to do that, you eventually figure it out, because they're great. There's no reason you should have to use something else. There's a few things that do things that they don't do, like dynamic EQ and some other little tricky things. But if you're forced to use only the stock plugins, you can do it. There's no reason you couldn't. But I'm not going to say what happened at the mix contest. Just saying that's one.
I didn't know. I shall investigate.
That's the first time I've ever mixed anything with completely Reaper stock plugins. But We'll see if those threads exist anywhere.
Very cool. It's also one thing I'm noticing these days a lot. Like, are these plugins, they create a problem and then they solve it. Like, I'm trying to think of a great example of this where I'm like, well, I never really thought I needed to do this thing
Until
that you're claiming you're like giving a solution for. I don't know. If
all
I
those
had
things.
a good example, yeah.
Well, sidechain compression was a huge thing. For the longest time, everyone was sidechaining their bass guitar with their kick and stuff like that. And it's great for some times, but 99% of the records made before 2000 were done without that. Not because you couldn't do it, just people didn't think of it. It wasn't that big of a deal. It's not necessary. But then after that time, when everyone was talking about it, people were doing that with everything. Like, I have a feeling if I go through people's projects, they're sidechaining compression, everything. They're using dynamic EQ. They're using sidechain gate. Just all this kind of stuff because it's possible. Where years ago, it wasn't possible. I mean, one of the things that used to come up with the original console I cut my teeth, which was a Neve 8068, and the EQ on that didn't cross, the cross sections between each band didn't really cross. So there were certain bands you kind of had to pick, like 3.2K or 4.8K. Or 1.8K. Like you couldn't sweep the compressor on that. I mean the EQ on that. You had to pick which frequency you wanted. And a lot of times you'd be like, I wish I can go somewhere in between these two. But it kind of forced you to not make those mistakes. And one of my mentors taught me with Rupert Neve, was a Neve console. He made the console so you couldn't make it sound bad. You weren't allowed to do like something.
It was calibrated, like those values.
Those were the most important values. And you started learning like 3.2. And then what would happen, your brain would start going like, you wouldn't even think about sweeping. You would just go 3.2 for the snare, 1.8 for the bass. Like, you'd learn those different things. It would be quicker, and you couldn't mess anything up because you had no ability to cut and boost the same frequencies because they didn't exist on the EQ. You only had so many frequencies to work with. So it forced you to do the best you could with that, and you couldn't mess things up. But then when the plugins came along, you can do infinite things with. You can go re-EQ and add 15 bands and do anything you want and come up with a surgical looking thing that makes absolutely no sense. But you can do that, but you couldn't do that with those old consoles because they didn't let you.
Yeah, so like limiting choices, that's one kind of argument I have for using some of these like analog emulations. It's like it limits your choices. You're not seeing a thing and lines like kind of going around and you're not sure what you're looking at or what's important. It's like just use the thing that has 3 bands and it forces you kind of to listen to what you're doing versus like somebody's asking a question which I'm not sure if I hope this is not like a sex thing. They're asking if you are an ENFP. Do you know what that means, or does anyone know?
I've never heard it before.
Okay, I hope it's not a sex thing.
One of us should Google it. ENFP. I don't know.
I'm not Googling it, but I do have a question, and you seem to be very detail-oriented and focused on the process. So I am sure that, like many of us, you have that itch of the thing that is kind of bothering you in the workflow, or that piece of gear that you would like to buy, or maybe that part of the video making process, like you mentioned, you got lights and cameras. So what is the itch right now? What is this next piece of gear or process that you want to optimize?
What I'd like to optimize is stop buying gear. I cannot. If you go on Amazon or any place where you can buy equipment, I think I showed you that stuff before we started recording. I have everything, or at least I've bought everything, and I've returned probably half of it. I try everything. Every little box that has like little keys on it. I have the Stream Deck over here, the white Stream Deck, because everything in my, notice everything is white. I bought these speakers because they were white. I just kind of like that aesthetic a little bit. But I bought the Torbox demo, which Torbox, something it's called, had like 3 knobs on it. I'm constantly looking for something that's going to be like this button I push that makes everything easier. So I constantly buying these little gadgets thing. My wife constantly laughs at me. She's like, you're just going to return it next week. I'm like, no, this is the one.
Your speakers are Adam, right?
Pedals over here. I keep swearing I have these things plugged in. I haven't found one action to do with them. I keep thinking I'm going to find like, well, I could use my feet. I'll be faster. But I can't think of one action that makes more sense to use your feet than your hands. So everything that has a knob, I buy it. Everything that has a fader, I try it. I mean, I'm always looking for something. But what I always come back to is a regular keyboard and a trackpad. This is a great little knob. Just put your 2 fingers on it and move it up and down. It's a great knob. It does everything you could do because Every other thing you use forces you to take your hands off of the two things where your hands are on. Your hands are on the trackpad or your mouse. The other hand's on your keyboard. So every other little box you have forces you to do something else, and it's always going to be slower. You know, a fader box, any kind of little thing. So in terms of new gear, what I'm really trying to do is not buy new things.
It's funny that you bring this up because we just talked about how having analog gear and dedicated synthesizers is good exactly because of that tactile feel and that kind of workflow. But I guess when it comes to working in the DAW or working with computers, that's not always desirable. It's kind of interesting.
It depends on what you can find. The problem has always been the cross-section from going from one to the other. When I first started cutting my teeth, I had a console and a tape machine. So you were always on the console. There was no computer screen and there was no mouse or anything like that. Once that got introduced, now you're using two different things where you were using one. So when you start using controllers, like the controller I showed you here, this little guy that never gets used, it's a great controller. But once you have to reach for this thing, it's great. And you could even like hit a button and then make this do your EQ thing. But then you're still looking at your console, you're still looking at your monitor to see what you're doing. So you're still thinking about two different things, and you're looking at what you're grabbing. You make sure you're grabbing the right one, and you're looking at your. So it's like your hand's already on your trackpad over here. Why would you grab something else when your hand's already in the right spot? You know what I mean? So it's like the only way it makes sense, and Pro Tools tried to do this years ago, is if you had something where every single knob exists. There's one knob for every single thing. And it's really hard to do with computers because with plugins, you have an infinite amount of plugins. So you have an infinite amount of faders and knobs. So unless you have a knob and fader for every single one of them, it's always going to be not as effective as using a mouse and a keyboard. You know, in the beginning when I first started switching over, I couldn't mix without a fader. I needed faders. But over time, I started playing with the trackpad, and you change your workflow. You change the actions you use for automation. And when you figure it all out, it always winds up faster to not use anything else.
I remember I had my foot pedal assigned to, one was record, one was to turn metronome on and off, and one was that stop delete media, which is my go-to thing because I'm a bad musician. But it was funny because I realized one day, like when I'm like in it and I'm focusing on the part and I'm doing the stuff, I'm not reaching for that pedal. I have to condition myself to use the pedal. So like it's supposed to be convenient, but really when I don't think about it, when I'm on autopilot and just focused on what I'm doing, I'm using the keyboard. It's fine.
Because you have the muscle memory built in. Unless you're doing something. We have like that Elgato thing I was showing with the foot pedal. That makes sense for someone who's streaming, and if you're holding a guitar in your hands and you want to switch to scenes, obviously you can't do it with your hands, so that makes more sense to have that ability. But if I'm just making a tutorial and no one's seeing where my hands are, it's more efficient to just touch one of the things that are on there. Now, the one box I was talking about before, the Tor box, I think it's called Tor box something. The thing that was appealing about that box was that it had enough knobs and faders on it that you can do everything with your hands, so you never have to touch the keyboard at all. So you could just you could do it. But what I found happened was you could do chords on it. So you could hit any keys on it, and you could hold one down and do another. And that was great because you could set up all these different keyboard shortcuts. But what I started realizing was I have about 75 that I use on a regular basis. So in order to do it with this little box, I found my hand going like this all around trying to grab it. I was doing Twister with my hand, and I'm like, I could just hit one key on my keyboard right here to do the same thing. It's great that I can do everything in this one box, but I'm gonna wind up mangling my hand trying to constantly twist it around. So I just like, you know what? I'm sending this one back. But I love all those. I love the idea of having a spaceship enterprise. You know, lights, things moving. I have this other thing I'll show you. The batteries are dead on it. It was like a $20 thing. And what's really cool about it is you could put this thing anywhere, and any sound that's going on in your studio, it blinks, and it, has that, it's like an audio input.
Oh, okay, cool.
And it's really cool. I thought I would love it. But what started happening was I put it up here, if you could see it. It would distract my eye. I would constantly see this light going off, like the same way you see, like if you have Facebook Messenger open or your, Slack. It would just constantly make me think something's going on. So after a while, I was like, I got to turn this thing off and take it down. So it's just sitting over here doing nothing. So in terms of gadgets, I'd recommend not buying any gadgets. Although I still do it with microphones. This microphone is only 2 weeks old, and I love it so far. But
mics are worth it.
What's that?
Mics are like they do give you something different.
That's the only mic I'm never going to buy, the one you're using. I refuse to.
This, I saw in your live stream that you talked about that. Yeah.
I've been cursing that thing out since day one, and that's the only mic I haven't bought for making podcasts.
It's very expensive for what it does, to the point where Shure now made a cheaper version of this, and it's almost like an admission of guilt. It's like, yo, we could have sold this to you for $275, but Michael Jackson used it, so $500.
But that one's metal, at least. The new one looks a little plasticky. I haven't bought that one. I thought about it, but Universal Audio makes a new one that's white and it kind of looks like their version of that thing, but I haven't bought that. The thing I've kind of moved away from, as you could hear, is dynamic microphones. The thing I like about this is it's a condenser. I don't really enjoy that whole, that pushing air sound thing.
Hey, how you doing, Kenny?
It sounds great and intimate and stuff, but I really want to move away from that. So then I bought a shotgun mic. Let me go show you that one. Showing you all my toys. So this is a $500 paperweight. I plan to use it eventually, but I use this for probably the last 10 videos, just out of this shot like here. Put it in here like this, because it picks up a more natural sound. You don't get any of those plosives real close to it, and I really liked it. But it was also getting like a plane came by or any noises going outside. I was picking that up much, so that's when I wound up and bought this one.
Yeah, I was using this and quickly realized, A, my room sounds bad, and B, like I do this thing where I go, hey, how's it going? Welcome to the... So I like start loud and I gradually go down to mumble. So it wasn't really working out for like multiple reasons. Yeah, MV7 sounds worse than SM7B for sure. We got a couple for the studio, and the UA one, the white UA SM7B looking one, it sounds fine. I think like what sold this to me was at the time we were doing a podcast where we were all in the same room, and I hadn't heard of Auto Mixer yet. It may not have been invented yet. But it was like any other mic we would use, it would always just bleed into everybody. Or alternatively, we would try to use one mic. And then there was too many, like I was always like fidgeting with something. So we're talking and you can hear like, I'm even fidgeting with poker chips now. If people are hearing that, I can't stop myself. I've tried to stop myself.
I haven't heard that at all.
Oh, okay, cool. Somebody told me stop playing with poker chips on your streams. I'm like, I can't. I don't notice when I do it.
I am fidgeting here. Yeah, it's impossible not to.
Somebody asked Kenny, and by the way, let us know whenever you want to wrap, because questions will never cease. But somebody asked about clip to zero mixing. Do you know what that is?
I do not. If you tell me what it is, I can tell you what I think of it.
Yeah, same thing, John Ponder. I never heard of this. I guess he's also saying using clippers. Do you use clippers?
Oh no! In fact, I discussed that with Schwab probably a couple of months ago because I'd never heard that people were using it. Yeah, it's not something I've always thought of clipping as something undesirable. I know it creates a little click when you do that, but I would, if I would wanted that sound, I would usually probably do it a different way. But there's nothing wrong with them. It's like
to me, clippers are sound design. They're not mixing. Like I wouldn't clip. You make a sound clip if you want to do a thing to it. You want to turn wind into a whoosh, put it through a clipper, like crank it, and then it just becomes like a texture. That's how I use it. I'm sure people do all kinds of wild stuff.
Wouldn't you say that the Event Horizon we were just talking about, that's a kind of a clipper? It's acting as a limiter, but it's clipping.
But I would just put that at the end of my mix. I would never put that on like an individual sound to make it clip. Clipping, usually you want to hear the clipping, right? You want to hear that clip happen?
Yeah, I suppose. Or you can just use it for a bit more headroom and not go as hard on your limiter for less pumping, I suppose. I do have another question that is circling back to, you mentioned before that you were interested in getting into this kind of streaming, longer form kind of content. And there is a trend these days of going to, I guess, shorter content. So those 1 minute long videos on YouTube Shorts and other platforms. Is this something that you are interested in looking into?
Actually, no. I don't. I'm a little hesitant to get into the streaming part where like make videos that are 3 hours long, which I'm not against them, but I don't think I want to make a lot of those. I know a lot of big YouTubers do that as well, and I haven't figured out why yet. But I like the 10 to 12 minute range. That's my preferred range, because I feel like that's a good place where you can teach somebody something and you don't bore them. You know, if they get bored after 10 minutes, you know, some of my favorite YouTubers make videos at 18 to 20 minutes, and I usually turn them off after 12 minutes because it's like, I got it. You know, so that to me, that's the reason I like. Not that I'm against any of these shorts, but I'm not. I'm obviously, as most people have noted on my comments, I'm older than most of you. So I don't like I can't watch TikTok because it messes with my brain. It creates these little soundworms because I keep hearing these short little segments in my brain constantly. So I don't like really short things. I know it's the trend, and I'm not against it, but I prefer to show something that takes 10 to 12 minutes to show. And that to me is my perfect range that I would shoot for, no matter what the content is.
I tried shorts and people didn't like it. And my demographic is somewhat older. I think it's because I hang out on Facebook and promote on Facebook. Okay. People did not like the short content, or at least they didn't like it the way I made it. Well,
the thing about shorts is what's going to hurt you is, like I was telling you before, your enthusiasm for this is your biggest asset. You know what I mean? And that's not going to come across as much in shorts. You know, that's going to come across your personality. I mean, you may not realize it, but it really is. You're one of those people that has this enthusiasm that's what's the word I'm looking for? It's
contagious, captivating.
Captivating. Yeah. So use that personality in there, and that's why I would encourage you to make longer videos, because short videos, you're just showing content. You know, you're just like this, and this. Yeah. Whereas a longer one, I mean, a lot of the things with YouTube, I think with the algorithm is to get people to just want your content. You know, when I watch a video by anyone that I watch, the first thing YouTube does after I'm done with it starts recommending more from that person. You know what I mean? So it's 30-second things or a minute long. You know, how much can I really consume of your content? You know, I'm just going to be banging through it. Whereas, I mean, I don't want to get into a whole philosophical theory of this, but there's a lot of people that happened since COVID where people are more separated from each other. So what's become a bigger part of YouTube is it almost becomes like companionship. So people find these charismatic people to kind of like share their world with. So some people just leave it on in the background and go on for 3 hours at a time. But some people just want to grab some content here and there in like 10 to 12 minutes, like I was saying before. And people are drawn to that. You know what I mean? So they want to get all that content from the same person, because there is a point of access to learning new things from new people all the time. You know, if there's a camera guy I love, and I always watch his videos he has the same camera as me. So I would love watching all his videos on that camera, because I don't have to spend the first minute or two like figuring him out. You know, and I got him already. So once I've got him, now the content comes quicker and it becomes easier to watch his video on it, which is like you.
Person.
His name he's in Canada. His name is Vic. What's his last name? I'll tell you in a second. Sure, it'll show up right
I'm
away.
also trying to learn about cameras, so I'm selfishly.
He's awesome. I'm crazy with absorbing YouTube content.
Oh, mastering in the box. That's coming, I promise.
People get mad
brush
doing
up.
mastering videos because I don't master. People get mad at me for not doing mastering videos because I never mastered anything. I'm a fan of like mixing until it sounds good enough, so it doesn't need to be mastered. So people get like, why don't you make mastering videos? I'm like, I don't really know anything about mastering. My goal is to give it to the mastering guy. And my goal at that point is for the mastering guy to go, sounds fine, we're done. So that's the goal. Let me search his name.
The wonderful. Oh well, I'll ask it in a second. Bo has a question. Who I gotta give credit to for getting Justin Frankel on the channel and starting this whole series, which we hope to get going. If you want to be on the channel, just let us know. You don't even have to do things in you know, if you're a Reaper user, that's a plus, but you don't have to have reinvented the wheel. If you wanna just come chat, we're hoping to have John on, of course, X-Rame, Amagalma, MPL, etc. Awesome. Did you find it, Kenny?
Yeah, his name is Vic Rame.
Vic, okay,
No. Vic Barry.
Oh, I don't know that.
He's actually in Ireland. I don't know why I thought he was in Canada. He's in Ireland.
There's a Canadian guy talking about cameras. I think Nick Niman. No, that's another person. Vic Barry. Cool. Small channel, too. I'm going to check it out.
Yeah, he's not that big. but he's really good. He's really good. But there's so many great camera channels out there. I mean, when you're done, you're gonna buy so many cameras. It took me so long to decide which one to buy. Luckily, I only bought one.
Nice.
For now. Because they're like microphones. I guess lenses are more like microphones. You end up getting more lenses than you need.
Well, you have multiple cameras, right?
I have one main camera and I use my iPhone as a secondary camera, but I do have more lenses than I need for the camera that I do have.
So
I'm still on the webcam.
The smart thing about buying the ZV-1 is it doesn't take lenses, so you can't buy lenses.
Oh, okay.
Smart.
Well, but it's like buying a USB microphone. You're limiting yourself. I think of the camera body as the audio interface and the lenses as the microphones. You end up buying more stuff.
But limits are good. You need some limits. You need some limits. You need to take certain things and limit yourself. If you have too many variables, it's just too many options. You need to have certain variables.
Somebody's asking, Bo is asking, is there a Reaper equivalent for Logic's aliases? Which I used Logic, but I don't remember what aliases are.
I don't know what that is either.
But Bayan, the one says pooled item. So I guess if that's what you mean, like an item that if you make an edit to it, another item similar to that changes, then pooled items is your uncle.
Correct.
Yeah, but I don't remember off the top of my head. Logic has so many things that like you don't come across, I guess, until you come across it.
Logic is funny because I used Logic I started using Logic before Pro Tools, and it's so different now because this is before Apple took it over. It was eMagic originally, and it looked so different. You used to have to build an environment in order to get everything. You'd have to like make track wiring in Reaper. You had to do that with all your tracks to like bust them so they all would go to the master. It was so weird.
Now the environment is like hidden away. You can never run into it.
You don't need it.
Yeah, you don't need it much.
That's the smart thing about Logic. Like you open a plugin and you don't even need to know what kind of plugin it is. It'll just do it. Like if you choose a bass sound, it just makes a whole bunch of plugins over there and that's your bass sound. Like you don't have to figure it out. You have to think about it. It's great because I used to work. I don't do it anymore. I used to volunteer downtown at a Boys and Girls Club, and the age range was from 7 to 12. And unfortunately, they were using Logic, and it just made the most sense for them because it was just so basic. They don't want to learn how to quantize or any of the complicated things you could do in Reaper. They just wanted to turn on a sound and go guitar, piano, you know what I mean, and just start playing. So it just made sense. And that's what they had. So that's what I was teaching them.
Yeah, that's what you need as a kid. Like my first DAW was able to, I would just go presets and I would just quickly make something and throw it away, whatever. Or even before that, Guitar Pro, I used to compose whole songs on Guitar Pro. Like the sound wasn't even registering to me that the sound is bad until years later. I was like, oh, this guitar sounds like, I don't know what, like my electric razor. Somebody's saying, this is a very general question, but I'll ask it. What's your favorite workflow tips? I guess it's kind of what you were saying, like just mouse, keyboard, do this stuff. I don't know.
Well, I made a video recently about mixing. There was 2 videos I put up there. One was about top-down mixing, which was about like starting. I love the idea of top-down mixing because it's like one of the things I think is really important when it comes to mixing is your ears being fresh. Because one of the mistakes you probably know if you've done any kind of mixing is that if you spend 3-4 hours working on something, you start getting into minutiae detail that you don't necessarily, no one's ever going to care about. But you get lost in it because you're focusing on that. So one of the things I used to always tell people is take as many breaks as possible. So mix as fast as possible for a couple of hours, then take a break, do something else, then come back and listen to it. And don't even touch the faders or anything. Just write down on a piece of paper everything that bothered you about it. And then fix just those things. And then after you spend like an hour or 2 on that, put it away again, go do something else for an hour. Come back, listen to it again, and then write things down. Because what will happen is there might be some background vocal tracks that you never EQ or compress. There might be a shaker that you never even touch more than bring the fader up, but it sounded fine. You spend time because people have this idea that you need to solo every single track and do something to it and to make it sound great in the mix. And that's not a bad idea, but is it important? Could you mix a song in 3 hours that you normally took 8 hours to mix? I think you can mix a record in 3 or 4 hours just as good and even more focused if you're listening to what other people would be listening to. And that's how you can do that very quickly. So top-down mixing thing is I would start by putting the whole track up and then just EQ and put a compressor on the master bus and just EQ the whole thing. Because if the whole mix is really dark, instead of having to EQ every single track, adding 3K or 5K to it, you do that all in one shot. The whole mix starts to sound like something. But then you start noticing, well, this doesn't sound right with this. And then you start going slowly down the line with buses and then to individual tracks as you work your way down. But by doing those moves very quickly, your ears get into focus correctly. Because if you start EQing a dark mix one track at a time, by the time you get to track 16, you're not really, you've lost focus or relativity as to where things should be. So you need to take an ear break, whereas you can do that right in one shot. Just grab the EQ, add the top end, add some low end, cut some low end, and get the mix to sound good with one EQ. Then you could work your way down the mix that way. So that's top down mixing. There was another one I posted very recently. What was the other one?
Finishing a mix quickly, I think it's called, right? Is that the one you're talking about?
These things pop into my brain and then pop out just quickly.
I do have a comment about this top-down mixing approach because there's something kind of related to that when it comes to programming. When writing software, you can come up with the overall idea of how the architecture is going to be like, and then you fill in the details, which is more top-down. But there is also the other approach of like I am working on task X, like a compressor. So I know I will need an envelope follower. I will need this and that. So I'll build up the tools and then I'll put everything back together. So that's a more bottom-up approach. And what I find in most situations is that it's better to do some of both. You start with one, maybe bottom-up, maybe top-down. It doesn't matter. You just start with something and then you purposefully switch. Now, okay, I got like these three pieces together. Okay, so now forget that I have this. How do I put the whole picture together? And then go back and forth. So do you think that that is something that makes sense in mixing as well?
Absolutely. Like if you're doing what I was just saying before, you EQ the entire mix and very quickly you hear the snare doesn't match anything else. It's way too bright compared to the rest of the mix or way too dark. Then you can quickly jump to the snare and adjust that. But by doing that, you're everything is with fresh ears. So you're making decisions very quickly in the process so that things that are jumping out at you quickly. The things that jump out at you 7 hours into a mix may not matter to anybody, but someone who's been listening to the mix for 7 hours, which is almost nobody. You know what I mean? So you're in the unique position that you're listening to something that no one's ever going to hear. No one's ever listening to a 3-minute song for 7 hours, except for you or the other people that produced it before you. So I'm saying you need to get yourself away from that. So if you notice something early that can only be fixed on an individual basis, absolutely jump out of that and then go back and forth. But always try to be either taking ear breaks or thinking overall as opposed to thinking too small. You know, like I said, you try to avoid I got a 72 track to mix and I'm going 1, 2, 3, 4. Because by the time you get to 70, you've lost completely focus you lost focus of your mix. You know, your tonal balance and your compression and stuff like that. So I would definitely be in favor of jumping back and forth quickly.
I see like bottom up as like an editing tool, like going through tracks, tuning them, declicking them, all of that, and that's like kind of putting the components together. And then I'm bad at doing mixes quickly though. I do waste a lot of time. But yeah, like then kind of top down is for like seeing the macro picture and like working on what doesn't work. What do you think, Kenny, about, I know some people use reference tracks to kind of reset their brains.
Well, let me back up there for a second. I'll go back to the reference tracks for a second. Again, you kind of brought up something with the process. You probably enjoy the process of mixing, so you probably spend more time on it, which is okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But you were saying that, but tuning. I don't consider tuning mixing. I consider tuning
right.
To
That's editing, production. Right? Yeah.
And same thing with recording. A lot of times, if you've ever done this before, where someone comes in and needs to record some vocals, and then you mix, your vocal comes out too loud because you lost focus. You were focused too much on the vocal. Or if you did a guitar solo, it comes out too loud because you need to separate mixing from all those things. So any kind of pre-mixing, any kind of tuning, any kind of editing, any kind of getting rid of noise, get that stuff out of the way. Then take a break. Again, I keep saying taking breaks. Then come back to it. Mixing should be just pure mixing, because if you start getting into tuning, you're getting way too hyper focused. A story I always say about tuning was I was tuning vocals one time. This is years ago, and I was tuning vocals for like 4 or 5 hours on this one track. Then I got into my car. I put on the Alanis Morissette record, Jagged Little Pill. I almost ripped my hair out. I couldn't believe how out of tune the whole thing was. People loved it. It sold 16 million copies. But to me, it was crazy out of tune because I became hyper focused on the pitch of vocals for those 3-4 hours I was tuning vocals. So you have no, no judgment. You have no perspective on your mix if you've just been tuning vocals for 3-4 hours or cutting vocals for 3-4 hours. You need to separate that. So I would say with the tuning, all those kind of things, separate that and then just set down a mix. You shouldn't be cleaning up tracks. You shouldn't be organized. You shouldn't be renaming your tracks. You shouldn't be moving the files around, cutting out order. All that stuff is cleaning up is all, and it's still important, but I separate that. The actual mixing is once all that's done, when you know where everything is just the sitting down and listening to it. And reference mixes, I do agree with, especially to not lose your perspective. I stopped using it years ago only because it sounds cocky to say, but I stopped needing it as much because I was able to do it. But I'll still throw them on once in a while just to get, especially if I'm in a new room, like if I book out another studio and I just throw on some tracks I listen to because I know how those sound in that room. But if I'm using my own room, I don't usually need to do it because I'm very comfortable with what I'm looking for in my speakers. But again, I wouldn't suggest that to anyone that hasn't been, again, I hate sound like I'm bragging, but I have been mixing for 30 years. So I've gotten used to where things should sound, but I still will throw out a mix every once in a while. But I feel very confident in knowing where things should sound EQ wise without a reference mix now. But it's still good. I'm not against them at all. Against using reference mixes.
It's good as like an air refresher if you need to kind of realign your perception of things.
Absolutely.
But what I've also started doing is I jump from mix to mix thanks to Reaper's groundbreaking project tabs. I know that it's totally good to take a break, but I don't do it. My brain gets into it. I like literally I've set timers for myself where I'm like in 45 minutes I'll stop, and then I literally will not hear the timer or something, or I ignore it or I shut it off. So I've started like kind of jumping branch to branch. I find that helps marginally, but there is a point after 2 hours you're just wasting your own time.
There's nothing better than going and doing something else, non-musical. Like go walk your dog if you have a dog, mow the lawn if you have a lawn.
Yeah.
Just something that's completely different. Because you just get yourself
House of Kush guy says like go like listen to the sound of water being poured and your ears start to like realign to what reality sounds like.
That's a good one. That's the ear bleach, I guess you'd call it. But you just really need to do that because the people that are listening to your mix or your song are hearing it for the first time. So you need to be in that headspace. You need to be able to hear. That's why I think it's so important to come back to it, listen to it, and just write down the things that bother you. Don't get into everything. Oh, didn't get a chance to check out the background vocals. Do they sound good? You're done. The background vocals are good. You know what I mean? Just what really bothered you. And if you want to tweak all that stuff later, you can still do that. But know in your head that it sounded great when you first sat down. You know, when you came down and were like, this sounds fine. The vocal, the only thing that bothered me are the snare and the guitar solo. It's the only thing that bothered me. Let me fix those things. And then take another break and come back and go, no, it sounds good.
What if everything bothers you? You're like, everything.
Well, someone asked that in the chat before. When do you like, I mean, there's been a million times where I just take all the faders. And that's one of the negatives of mixing in the box is that it's harder to grab all the faders and just push them all down. Because I've done that many times on the Neve. I would just take all the faders and just push them all down mad and just take all the EQs and push them all back. I guess you could just hit some kind of keystroke. I'm sure you make a script for it and do that. Just reset everything and start again. It's not a bad idea to do that. Just start over if you hate it.
But it can be a bad idea to do it
at that moment because you're so angry. It's probably a better idea to go, I'm going to take a break, come back, listen to this mix fresh. And if it's still crap, then restart everything again.
I think that you hit at something interesting, Arya. You said that you put timers, and I tried this before. There's like the Pomodoro technique and all of those things. I don't think that they help because I think that one of the most important things you have as a creative person is your focus. And if you are on purpose breaking that, I don't think it makes any sense. Now, it's important to take the breaks, but I think that they need to come naturally, and I think that you need to train yourself to time them according to what you're doing. Sometimes it's going to be 20 minutes. Sometimes it's going to be 2 hours. But you still, if you put a timer, I don't think it works. It gives you that impression that you can impose some control over the work, but it doesn't really work like that. You're let me give you a different thought on that, because when I use the Pomodoro, I really like them, but for the opposite reason. You're against the breaks. To me, it forces me to work, because when I see that timer that's not been turned on yet, I know So instead of going to Facebook or Reddit or anything like that, as soon as I click that timer, I know I have to work. So it forces me to start working.
and then I continue working until the timer says stop. And then I don't do it religiously, but when I do use it, I do enjoy it, but for the opposite reason that you don't use it, because it's not about breaks. It's about making sure I get to work. Because
I think what Leandro is saying is it's kind of like, like with the REM sleep cycle, they say try to like, if you're setting an alarm, try to make it so that it cuts the REM cycle at a low time. I think I agree with you, Leandro, in that after 40 minutes, I may be at the top of my focus, and then literally 7 minutes later, I lose it. So it's like if I can make myself get up in 7 minutes instead of exactly at 40 minutes, it's kind of like. But I like your thought too, Kenny. Oh, I only have 20 minutes. Ah.
It just depends on your workflow. I tend to be this person who wakes up around 10 in the morning and make myself a coffee. I sit down at 11. I start doing things, and it could be 2 o'clock before I actually open ScreenFlow and start my editing. So I put that off. Once I start getting into it, I do it. But if I could force myself, 11 o'clock, you have to start editing, then I would do that. But I work alone. I have no one, making me do it. So I do it when I want to do it. So to me, I don't look at it as forcing myself to take breaks. Those breaks are my rewards for actually getting to work. Start working, and then your reward is you get to take a little break. I'm the king of distractions. I can be distracted by anything.
Yeah, easy. Somebody's asking, and I know the answer to this because it came up in one Reddit discussion, which is, have you tried the pink noise mixing technique? I know you're not a huge fan, I think, because you already have the ear.
About that. Yeah, I'm not a fan of any of those kind of automatic things because I just don't see, I don't think that's the goal. The pink noise one, I've also seen people talk about LUFS. They'll get all the tracks to sound the same LUFS level and then start from there. It's a nice idea, but is the kick supposed to be the same level as the vocal? I don't think so. I mean, if you're trying to balance out full mixes to each other, I don't think it's bad to use LUFS. But I guess pink noise is the same thing, right? You're trying to match the level of each of them. But the goal, one of my favorite, actually he's one of my enemies, but one of my favorite things he said was the goal is not to get rid of mistakes. The goal is to emphasize things that are good. So if the tambourine being 30 dB too loud sounds good, do that. The goal isn't to make the mix sound even. That's how you make a commercial. You know what I mean? Like a Budweiser commercial, as Steve Albini would say. You're trying to make nothing bothers you, but nothing actually moves you either. One of those years ago, there was a radio program I used to talk about the goal of the radio station when they play pop music is to make sure someone doesn't get annoyed by something so they don't turn the channel. So what you're actually making there is music that doesn't annoy people. So you make it really sound safe. So everything sounds pretty and glossy and nothing jumps out at you or scares you. But that's not necessarily good music. That's just safe music that just sounds nice and even. And as one song goes to the other, it still sounds nice and even. So it's like you're creating elevator music, basically. You know what I mean? Because you try not to annoy people. But the goal of the mix is not to make something where nothing sounds bad. You're not just eliminating bad things. You're trying to make some good things. The vocal sounds great. Make it loud. Like that Radiohead song where it goes, cha-cha, cha-cha, and that guitar comes in ridiculously loud, Creep. It's that's ridiculously loud. But that's
the shit. That's
but you remember that. You know what I'm saying? When that thing came in, I had my producer partner, who very much reminds me of you, a very excitable guy. He would turn that on so loud in the studio, he would just jump out of his seat and just and then just play that. He loved it. That's the kind of stuff that moves people, gets people excited. But if you mixed it like a Bud Light commercial, you'd have a just sitting in the background and just coming in nice and at the right level. You know what I mean? Sometimes things need to be obnoxiously loud to move you. That's what greatness is. But it's not just eliminating mistakes. I don't know where we started with this.
What I always say is
this conversation.
What I always say is if you think, because some people are like, how many dB should my guitar be? And I'm like, if that's your thought point, Isotope is 6 months away from replacing you with a machine learning tool that would do that better than you will ever even be able to aspire to do. Because if it's about numbers, quantifiable, exact amounts of dB that you need to hit for it to be a certain way, machines are gonna win. You can't beat machines at math, so you gotta beat them at this ethereal human emotion stuff, because you can't be I'll be able to set these values to the exact thing that they should be
it's just a matter of time. It's just a matter of time.
Yeah, they'll do it. Because machine learning can also be this like plugin has listened to every record in every genre, including like non-12 tone stuff, and yeah, they'll get us all.
But what's unfortunate about it is what again, we talk about evolution. The evolution of marketing to people who want to make music, it's not about what you need, it's about what you think you need or about what you want. Zig Ziglar used to say that about he's one of the greatest salesmen of all time. You don't sell people what they need, you sell people what they want. And what they want is an easy way to make a mix sound great. So they fall into these traps of these other things. It's not about giving them what they need. It's about giving them what you think they'll buy. That's why you have things like Drum Monkey and these other things where you hit a button and it then plays an entire thing. And nothing wrong with that if that's not what you're interested in. But like I was saying before, I like making the sausage. I like putting up a kick and snare and making the beat. I enjoy that. I don't want you to give me something where I could hit a key and it plays the whole song. It's great if I wasn't trying to make music, but I'm trying to make music. But I'm not knocking those tools. I made a video on Captain Chords because I thought it was the best tool for that. Like, I don't make a lot of those kind of videos, but I thought that was a good one because some people don't know chords. Some people don't know, and they just want to make some pop-sounding music. They just want to put down this chord. They want some easy sounds. Because like I was saying, Reaper doesn't come with a lot of sounds. For that, I think it's like $80, $90. You get a lot of good sounds for that price. And it just gets you on the way of going, kind of what the Logic does, kind of that step in that direction.
Yeah, but you're off to the races, yeah.
But you don't want to, but I don't want to make it where you're only going to, if you just use the presets that are there, you're going to make boring pop music. You have to find some more interesting thing to do it. But I don't mind this being some launching points, but at some point, like mixing, if you don't want to mix, you just shouldn't mix. You know what I mean? If you're not enjoying it. And if you are enjoying it, just bang your head against the wall. And just know that people like me spent decades before we were happy with anything we mixed. I mean, I'm 53. I started when I was like 16, and I listened to things I did. Even the Beatles said it. The Beatles said they listened back to their old recordings, the ones that were still alive, and they would change everything about their original recordings. That's normal. That's okay.
That means you evolved, right? Otherwise,
Exactly.
If you like what you did 10 years ago, you haven't moved past knowing what you did wrong back then.
If I go back to something I did 20 years ago and I was impressed, that means I've done nothing in the last 20 years.
I guess it's hard to
find. That guy
find.
was good.
Yeah. It's hard to find the line where, like, I always feel like I am overcritical of myself. And I know a lot of people have this where they go and compare their mix with, like, I don't know, award-winning stuff. And it's like, well, okay, yeah, you're right. Maybe your mix is not as good as an award-winning mix. But how does thinking that help you? I feel like it doesn't. Like,
Right.
It never helped me. I'm always like of the opinion. I listen to like Snarky Puppy. I'm like, I'll never be able to mix live, like, live music to this extent. But I just after a while realized it doesn't help me to think that way. Like,
No, you got to find your own path. I mean, there are a lot of great people that do copy. Back in the day when we were first doing a lot of our pop productions, we would go to a Virgin Megastore and we would buy like 12 CDs. And we would go to the store and we would just inspire ourselves to what was going on pop of the day and just listen to all those things. And there's nothing wrong with going in that direction if you're trying to, go into that very sneaky lane, if you're trying to copy that. But at some point you do want to separate yourself from the other things that are going on. Because one of the things I always said with pop or any kind of thing professional in this business is what you need to do is you need to convince an audience to like what you do, because then you can do that forever. If all you're doing is like, there was a guy, Dr. Luke was a great songwriter during my time. And I was like, if I learn how to write like he does, maybe I could fool people for a certain amount of time, but I'm constantly struggling to mimic what he's doing. Whereas what he did was he convinced everyone to like what his songwriting was. He wasn't just a great songwriter. He convinced the world this is what songwriting is. And once he does that, he can just keep writing songs because he's already fooled the world into liking what he does. Not to say fooled. He's a very talented songwriter. But once you convince an audience to what you're good at, then it becomes less effort because you just keep doing that. This is what I do. You know what I mean? But once if you keep faking and trying to imitate someone else, you're going to have to keep doing that forever. Because it's going to get a little complicated to constantly be chasing someone else, or someone else is going to come out as successful and you're going to start chasing them. So you have to somewhere find your own identity. So if at some point you can easily copy things to get the confidence of like, I'm as good as this person, but at some point you need to find your own thing. Like if your thing is loud drums, do loud drums. If your thing is loud guitars, do loud guitars. It's your thing. Because if one of your songs becomes successful, everyone's going to start doing what you do, and they're going to start coming to you to do what you do. And that's kind of the goal in the money side of this, at least, or the successful side of it, is to convince the world.
What's your thing, Kenny?
What's
Yeah,
that?
what's your thing? I was thinking
Loud drums. I love loud drums. A few of my favorite mixers remixed my songs and the drums weren't as loud as my mix. And I was like, I love what they did, but my mix is better because my drums are louder. I love loud drums.
love what you do to vocals because it's not like, I don't like mixes where the vocals are here and everything else is back here. Like you have to literally like, I don't know. I listened to some old, I think it was Queen. Even Queen is not super guilty of this. Or Michael Jackson it was. If you like cut out the Michael Jackson bit, there's like gold happening on the record. You just never
totally.
hear it, right?
Totally. Absolutely. No, those records are impeccable.
And it's like, it's heartbreaking. And it's like, oh, the bass player, like, was it Marcus Miller in
Right.
like, you don't even hear it. Yeah.
What they used to do on those records, they bring in all the best studio musicians and they would just take out reels of tape and they would just have a bass player play a bass on all the songs on that record. And then they put that tape away and grab another tape, a copy of it, have another bass player come in and he'd play on all the songs. So they had all different versions of the song with different studio players adding their funk onto it. And they would just kind of like pick and choose. Like, I really like the guitar playing of this guy, I like the guitar. I mean, these are back when records, like the unlimited budget. You know what I mean? They spend years and just going crazy with all the best people. But that was It is a shame that people don't hear instrumental records more, where they can hear the vocals and hear what's going on underneath it, because it's such amazing stuff going on underneath there. It is true.
Yeah. Somebody's asking, I guess, yeah, like, do you think the vocal message is the most important thing in the mix? Is that your kind of main goal, or how do you approach that?
It's funny. I usually fight with my wife about this because she's the yin to my yang when it comes to vocals. Because I used to always tease that I don't listen to I listen to the vocals, but I don't listen to what they're saying. So there'd be a lot of nonsense songs that I would still be a fan of because I feel like it still moves you. Even if but she listened to the lyrics and go, that doesn't make any sense. That doesn't make any sense. This doesn't make any sense. I'm like, yeah, but it still kind of feels good. I like it. So I would go more by the feel of it. And she's more like a Bob Dylan fan, where she's like, no, the lyrics need to be like poetry, like stuff like that. And it's a mixture of both. But to me, it's like the vocal is the most important thing. That's why I on one of my blogs I mentioned mixing, and people push back on this all the time. Start with the vocal. Because if you get the vocal to sound great, again, it comes back to quick mixing. If the vocal sounds great, in your face, EQ'd right with all the effects on it, and you build everything else around it, you won't be trying to fight to get the vocal in it. You'll be considering the vocal the whole time. Because what a lot of times amateur mixes would do, and I did it myself, you start with the drums, you get them to sound great, you go onto your bass, you go into guitar, vocals, pianos, strings and stuff, and then you put the vocal on last, and it doesn't fit. And you start doing things to the vocal to make the vocal fit. And it's the most important thing in the record. And here you are trying to make the thing fit. It's like making a steak and potatoes and things and putting the steak on last, and it doesn't work. So you have to change the steak. It's like, no. Start with the steak and then build everything around it. If this thing doesn't sound good with the vocal, move it. Turn it off. The tambourine is getting in the way of the vocal. Turn it off. If the drums are too loud, turn them down. The vocal has to be the most important thing. So if you build around the vocal, and so what I would do is I'll turn the vocal on, make it sound, I call it a basic vocal sound. Get the vocal to sound as good as possible, then turn it off and work on the drums. Then as soon as the drums sound decent, put the vocal back in. How do the vocals sound with the drums? Sound good? All right, turn the vocal back off. Work on the bass. And then constantly bring the vocal back in as it's like this side thing that has to like come in your room and make sure everything sounds good. The vocal has to keep coming back in. This way you're always considering that lead vocal. And then at the end, you're not slapping it on at the end. It's always going to work. When you're done with your mix, the vocal sounds great because you've built around the vocal, which again is what everyone cares about. And it's the easiest thing to ignore. So many bands would come to me after the mix was done and they would give all the mix comments and they would never mention the vocals. I'd be like, dude, the vocals are the most important thing. All you're talking about is the kick, the snare, the bass, the guitar, the instrument that you play, which is another rule I would have.
Right, yeah,
you can't talk about your instrument. If you don't like something, it has to be someone else complaining about it. You can't say you don't like something about the bass if you're the bass player. It has to be your instrument. And the vocalist would never complain. So no, I was the only person sticking up for the vocalist.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Getting feedback from bands, it's always like a clash of egos more than. I like your policy. Yeah. Feedback from any person about not their instrument.
Exactly. Because you're supposed to be a listener, not supposed to be the bass player in your band. And the other thing is I would say with the bands is you have to give me one set of mix changes. The bass player can't send me mix changes, the drummer can't send me mix changes, and the singer can't, because then they all clash with each other. You got guitar up, guitar down. It's like, no. One person decides and everybody decides that together, and then that person comes to me. That's the only way it works.
Interesting. Part of, I guess, So now you live in South Carolina. If
I do.
people don't know that, so was that kind of part of why you stopped recording bands, or was it just, or like I don't know? I'm sure there would be people who would go down there to work with you.
That's what did happen. The first few years I was here, I had a few clients that were my favorite clients, and I just flew them down here. They live in my house for a month or two, and we just make the record together that way. Because I had the house I'm in now is a little smaller. The house I first moved to was huge, so I had enough room for them to stay, and I had my studio in my house. So we would just make the record there. I had the band, we'd fly the drummer down for a couple of days, do his tracks, then fly him back. I mean, a lot of these bands were not full-on bands. They were like mostly 1 or 2 people that were the main people in the band. So we'd fly them down and make records that way. So I did it that way, but I was very choosy about the ones I did that. People obviously I was willing to live with for a month or two. So some of my best friends I was making music with that way. So, but the choice was just because I was doing much more mixing work at the time, and most of the mixing work didn't require that I was with people in the room, because I don't usually like to mix with people in my room anyway. I usually like to they can come in at the end, or mostly online stuff is usually the best because they can listen to the music in their place and give me the feedback, instead of it constantly being in behind me and going, "Can you solo the snare?" It's like, no, we're not doing it that way. We're not working on the snare together.
It gets
talk about the snare later.
I can't fight. I once had this problem and I couldn't think of a democratic way to tell them, like, you need to leave.
Right. It's very hard in the beginning, because in the beginning, the bands don't trust you. Like when I was like 17 and 18 working in studios, the bands don't trust you because they think they know more than you. And they probably do. So it becomes harder. But as you get older, now you're 30 and they're 17, and you have, again, I didn't mean to put this in the shop, but you have a gold record behind you. They've come to you because of that. So they get a little more trust going on here. So then they don't even want to be in the room when you're mixing. Like, we'll come back and listen to it later. It's fine. But it's hard in the beginning because you have you're no more of a mixer than they are in their minds. So it gets hard to fight those battles because you haven't shown that you're such a great mixer that they should just trust you.
Mm-hmm.
Not that anything really changes, because honestly, the gold record didn't change anything in terms of if none of these records went gold or platinum, it wouldn't have changed how those mixes were. It just changes the perception that the world has for you. Really, the records were the same records. Absolutely. They could easily been shelled and failed. It just so happened it worked out that way. There's so many things that go into a hit record. I can't take credit for any of them. I've done much better records that didn't go gold and platinum, and I've done, so it's just the way it works out.
Absolutely. Is somebody's asking if you're tired of 808 kind of kick drums? Like, do you miss real drummers?
Well, the 808 specifically, I was sick of 10 years ago, because I always noticed, like in a lot of R&B and rap, they're just using the same sound. I just kind of was lazy. But nowadays, it doesn't bother me as much anymore, especially with a lot of 808s using as like 808 as the bass, the bass sound, as opposed to the. I mean, people are still being creative with it. I don't really. I get a little bored of the 808 snare, but at the same time, if you're using it, like what I said before, if everyone's using the same SNIS, everyone's using the same drum kit, then it's up to you to be creative in other ways. So it's actually harder for them because they're not doing anything different. Anybody can put an 808 down and get a good drum sound. When I originally started, it was like harder to get good samples. So it was about who got the best samples, and they hired people who got the best 808s and stuff. Now everybody has access to anything. So the only thing that differentiates you from somebody else is everything else you're doing on the record, because that part's easy. You know what I mean? Like anybody can put down an 8. So, and it comes to, but the original question you were saying was more real drums. Honestly, I was upset about not being more real drums out there for a while ago, but now it's just sound paintings. I kind of look at it like it's sound paintings. The one thing I don't like, and I've said this for years, is I don't like when people use fake drums to make it sound like real drums. Like if you're trying to fool me, that doesn't work to me. If you're trying to make it sound electronic, or you're trying to even make it sound like drum software, that's fine. But if you're trying to make it sound like don't give me drum software and then have a guy in the video playing fake drums. Like, you know what I mean? Like, don't try to, like, I hate the idea of trying to fool people. Either use real drums if you want to be real drums, or use fake drums and build around that. But I have no problems with music being that, although it is unfortunate when you go through the top 100 on Spotify, there's almost nobody using real drums. So it's a little disheartening, but it is what it is. An evolution. People are going to, I feel very strongly that people are going to gravitate towards what they like. And if people liked Led Zeppelin sounding records, then that's what people would make, because there are people making records that sound like that. It's not going to the top because people like it. It becomes more niche, and that's fine. But it's not because it's a very democratic system. You know what I mean? Nobody's holding people down. One of the things I used to always fight about, because I work closely with the labels, is the people telling me that labels are forcing music down people's throats. And that's not true. All the labels are doing is trying to analyze what you like and going, oh, people like this, let's give them more of that. Oh, now people like this, let's give them more of that. That's all they're doing. It's just a mirror of what people like. So if people started liking real drums and going back to like rock or, Southern rock, or that's what people would be making, because labels are going to sign what people like. They're not trying to force feed anyone, because they can't. I was around enough records that they spent $30 million trying to promote that didn't work. They did the exact same thing they did on the Katy Perry record, and it didn't work on the other record, because they don't know. Nobody knows what's going to react. So they're always chasing what's successful. So if you're successful doing something different, everybody's going to start doing that. It's not about them going, well, we know better, so this is what we're going to force down people's throats. That's not the case. It's an evolution. As people like things, they're going to gravitate towards it.
That's an interesting thought, because at the same time, you're saying, and it's true, that you cannot make people like a certain thing, but we tend to like the things that we are exposed to. So we tend to like the songs that are sort of similar to songs we heard before, at least in some way, like the tuning system. It always bottoms down to something that we are familiar with. So at the same time, you cannot make something popular by force, but you also exert some control over what people are exposed to. So you exert some, as a label or people promoting music, you do have some control over what people may like in the near future, maybe. So it's an interesting thought then. What makes people like certain things or not?
If someone knew that, they would have a job forever. I mean, there's a reason why the overturn of president of labels, A&R, VP, those people are constantly being turned over, because they have a hit with one thing and they have 6 more failures after that. And they get rid of that person, they bring another person in, because there is no one person that knows it all. That, people think they do, and they try to ride on their success. Like, look, I had this hit record, and therefore everyone. But nobody knows what people are going to like. They think they hear it, but what happens is they just have more. They just have a few successes enough to hide all the hiding things. Like, the biggest joke in the label system used to be that the president of the label wouldn't put their name on the record until it sold a certain amount. And then suddenly they come on and they're the executive producer of that record. And it's like they were just waiting for it to become successful. But before that, it was like the Marcy Playground is a perfect example. They almost got dropped. They were on EMI. They got dropped. They brought over new people. They didn't really like it. They didn't get it. But then one person believed in it, played it for a certain radio station, and then it blew up. And then everybody came to me after that, was like, oh, well, the Marcy Playground had that song. Everybody knew that was going to be successful. It's like nobody knew that was going to be successful. Yeah, Nobody knew it.
Yeah, that's funny when they try to like rewrite history.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
There was a guy who worked in publishing. I forgot his name right now, but he was awesome. Remember the artist Shaggy? He had that song, It Wasn't Me? It wasn't me. It wasn't me. He had a thing on his door, and it was because all those record people used to have these big promotional posters of their artists. And it was Shaggy, had this poster, and it had listed 7 songs on this thing. And usually when they do that, it would be like the 7 singles they think are going to be singles. And at the time, Shaggy was already huge, and he had 3 or 4 hit songs on the record, on the charts. And I looked at that, I'm like, what record is this? He's like, that's the newest record. I'm like, I don't recognize any of those songs. He's like, that's why I put it up. Those are the 7 songs people thought were going to be hits. He's the biggest thing in the world right now, and all his songs are not the ones listed on that poster. So I put that up there to remind myself of how full of shit this industry is, because these are the songs that everyone thought were going to be the hits, and they were not, because that's just the way it is. You don't know. Something comes up, and then everyone chases that.
Yeah, and it's like the trick is like staying ahead of it a little bit. And even the thing you were saying, like labels try to find out what people like. I think even outside of labels, that's what people try to do. Like I was making music, nobody was saying, hey, good stuff. Then I started making tutorials. People said, hey, good stuff. And I got one compliment and I ran with it. Like, I think like the trick, because people, there's a thing I somewhat don't believe in, which a lot of people do, and it's like, if you do what you do, like build them and they will come. I'm like, you may build it and they will never come. Like, you should do some market research. You should try to find out what people like. If you're always just like, if you have a singular vision, you may find yourself 15 years into making music with like not a lot of people listening to it. Like
that's a hard part of knowing, because you don't know. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah, you
how do
can
know.
know.
How do you know when it's time to give up? I knew very early. So I moved to producing and engineering very quickly, like 17, 18. I started realizing what I liked about it was that I had many swings, I used to say. My manager used to call it many swings, where it's like, it doesn't matter what I look like. I can have a hit song on the radio now. You know, I'm 53, I could be 63, I could be 73. It doesn't matter. As long as I keep writing or producing, I could always have a hit, because as a producer, I'm not tied to the thing. You know, the artist or the singer, they're tied to the thing. When the industry is sick of them, they move on from that thing. But they're never going to move on from producers and engineers that know what they're doing. You know, there's mixers, like if you use like Billie Eilish, for example, her and her brother made that record in their room. But at the end of the day, they hired a mixer who was successful to finish off the thing, to make it sound finished. Those kind of people can be any age and they could do it forever. You know, because nobody knows them enough. You don't want to be so famous that people get sick of you. You know, you want to be behind that people kind of trust you. All right, here's the guy we go to when we need to sound great. You know, they did a great job with this, but we need it to be finished. You know, so it's always good to have that many swings in that thing. So I knew I wasn't meant to be an artist forever, because I was chasing things constantly and it wasn't taking off. But when you're really talented, it is really hard. And it's even harder now for musicians, because I think the space for being content creators, you know, on YouTube is a better avenue almost than being a musician. It's like I used to tease my bands all the time. You're not artists, you're t-shirt salesmen. You know, there was band but I'm like, what you basically do is you play a show, and then afterwards you sit at a table, and these were all good-looking young guys with long hair, and they would sell their t-shirts, and they would sit out there, and they would do like $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 a night in merch. But they couldn't sell their records. No one was buying records at the time. You know, everyone was just getting everything on, you know, streaming and stuff. But they were great at selling their t-shirts and hand selling them to t-shirts, because they were good-looking guys. So I'm like, you guys are t-shirt salesmen who happen to make music. So it's unfortunate that the world changes that way, because it's really hard to ever picture making music as the only thing you do. I mean, you see it with all the female artists that sell fragrances and makeup and stuff like that. I mean, it's unfortunate, but that's where the money is. There's no one's going to pull off how do we get people to pay for music again? That's just not a thing. People have decided that music is just streaming. That's just what it is. You have to figure out a way of monetizing yourself some other way.
Yeah. The metaphor I like to use, which people think is weird, is like, don't try to be Marcellus Wallace and John Travolta from Pulp Fiction, because those dudes get shot. You got to be the wolf, the guy who shows up when there's trouble and nobody knows they need you. Like, you will always be in demand, and you're never in danger. You're just there when the dead body needs to be disposed.
Back in the day, me and my partner Shep, we used to be production and songwriting partners, and they used to always come to us they just made a record with some artist, some young female artist, and they've recorded 12, 13 songs. They love the album. They don't have the first single, so they're coming to us with that. But here's the best part: not only don't we have the first single, we don't have any more money. We spent all the money on making the record, so we have no money, and we need a hit song. That used to always be the MO of them, but I'm sure they did the same thing to all of us. All our peers.
Somebody say we need a fragrance. Yeah, let's get a Rhea perfume something.
A Reaper fragrance.
Wonderful. Kenny, well,
because I can
sorry,
talk about,
go on.
If people want to know about coffee, I saw coffee questions.
Yeah, you know when they do like comedians in cars getting coffee. Like the cars and coffee aspect, like brings in, it's like marrying three niches together. Absolutely. You and Mike should do a thing like that, where it's like Reaper tutorial makers in their own houses making coffee.
Well, I do have a plan. I'm see if I have my name still saved here somewhere. Called the Studio Kitchen, where one of my channels, I haven't started it yet, but I'm going to start cooking. It's for a record producer who starts cooking food. I'm going to show you how to make the simplest things I know how to make. My wife's a chef, so she laughs at it. She's like, "You're going to be hugely successful with this cooking show," and I'm the one who knows how to cook. You don't know how to cook shit. But but the angle is that a record producer, you still need to eat. So here's how you can make some really simple things. So I have like some ramen stuff and coffee and things like that. Nice. So that's one of my ideas. I think it'd be funny.
You should do like 5 dishes you can cook on tubes of an amp. And it's like scrambled egg, tuna
Here's how
milk.
you use an analog compressor.
I would watch the hell out of that. Cooking is my, I'm actually ironically better at cooking than I am at audio stuff. But yeah,
So you should do a cooking channel.
I tried. The production value on cooking channels is so goddamn high.
Gotcha.
Like, it's just like you will never. But I thought about it, especially because like I know like Iranian dishes and stuff like that. It could do well, but like the cooking realm of YouTube, the competition is insane.
But there's still a lot of space for it. There's this woman on there,
Yeah.
if you know, she used to work at New York Times, and during COVID, they laid her off. Her name is Beryl. I forgot her last name. She's in New York City, and she started doing this thing with the cooking show. And I love it because what she does is she writes away to people, and people write her how they make their dish in their country. So it's like how they do mac and cheese, how they do their salads, how they do their this.
That's
And then
cool.
and they do like a little video like this where they explain what they do. And while they explain it, she's in there like making it. And it's like a little small little camera, and she's just doing it. And then she just explains, and she tries it for the first time. And she's trying how all these places like Iranians would make mac and cheese, or how they would do their I don't know, salads or whatever it is. And I find it fascinating. But she doesn't
So
have crazy quality, and she's got tons of hits. I think she gets like million followers. So the spaces are huge on YouTube. They really are.
Wow, I don't know. I need to check out this channel.
I'll send you the channel. I'll send you all my favorite channels.
Yeah, please do.
This is
We
what I
like
do instead of
cameras. We
video.
like cookings.
And that's
saw
what you do
someone-
from 11 to 13 when you should be editing videos.
Is it Beryl Shereshewski?
That sounds right.
Okay,
sounds
cool. Very,
She
very.
has like a really good picture behind her. Just check out some of her videos. Her highest quality.
Nice.
They're really cool, and the quality isn't that good. She cooks on this little stove that's a propane stove. And I asked my wife, I'm like, well, if I start my channel, I want something like that. But I'm like, I looked into it, and those aren't supposed to be cooking inside. She's like, it's fine, it doesn't matter. I'm like, you're not supposed to cook inside with propane. She's like, it's fine. I'm like, it's not really. The house explodes. They're gonna go, why are you cooking with a propane stove inside? But that's what she cooks with in the apartment. I'm like, I hope it's okay.
Yeah, they do that often because also like the stove is somewhere where you can't get a good shot. So
Yeah.
they just, even when you have a stove, you get one of those. Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Crack open a window. Or actually, that's bad for sound. It's fine. So low.
Take it to you, make it.
Yeah. Well, Kenny, thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
I hope to have you here again.
Sure.
We say this to everybody, but every once in a while, just come chat with us. It would be fun. You're always welcome on this channel, of course. Thanks to everybody who watched. Thanks for all the questions. If I missed some, or I intentionally ignored whatever was like, here's a feature I want, I guess. But yeah. Sorry if I missed anybody's question. Leandro, do you have any last questions?
I don't have last questions, but I do have a last thank you. Thank you for teaching us so much over the years and for being so earnest and coming here and talking to us. It has been lovely. It's great to have you here.
Same for you guys. Really appreciate what you guys do.
Yeah, you're awesome, Kenny. You're very fun. You're all like, some people about Schwa, they message me. They're like, I didn't know Schwa would be cool. And I'm like, I don't know if that's a compliment.
Well, my favorite YouTube comment is, I had no idea you were that old. You have such a young voice. I'm like, yeah, I guess having a young voice sounds like a compliment to you, but it doesn't sound like a compliment to me. You're so much older than I thought you were.
But yeah, you're all very cool. You, Justin, Schwa, I'm sure other people who will have on the channel. So stay tuned and all of that. Smash that like button. I cannot. All right. Adios, everybody.
Bye.
Take care. Thank you.